The scream tore through the wall like a blade. Caleb Ward froze mid-step, his daughter's bedtime story forgotten in his hand. That wasn't anger. That wasn't fear. That was pure animal panic, the sound someone makes when gravity has already won. He was through his door in seconds, shoulder slamming into apartment 7B before his brain caught up with his body. The woman hung suspended in the center of the room, twisted like a broken marionette, her face purple, eyes wild with terror. "Don't move," he commanded, already calculating angles, weight distribution, the 12 different ways this could end badly. She was falling, and he had maybe 5 seconds to catch her. If you're watching from your city, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, anywhere in this country, drop a comment below and hit that like button. Let me see how far this story travels. Now let me tell you exactly how Caleb Ward became the man who refused to let anyone fall alone. The first thing Caleb learned about Mia Collins was that she made terrible decisions at 7:30 on a Wednesday evening. The second thing he learned was that she weighed approximately 115 pounds, most of it currently defying physics in ways that would make an engineer weep. "I said don't move," Caleb barked, his hands already reaching for her waist as her body trembled in what he now recognized as an inverted yoga pose gone catastrophically wrong. Her arms had given out. She was suspended by one leg hooked through what looked like a silk hammock bolted to the ceiling, and the mounting bracket was making a sound that metal should never make. A creaking, groaning protest that said, "I was not designed for this." I can't breathe." Her voice came out strangled, desperate. Caleb moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent 15 years making split-second decisions in worse situations. He positioned himself beneath her, one hand supporting her lower back, the other reaching for the silk wrapped around her ankle. "Listen to me very carefully," he said, his voice dropping into that calm, authoritative tone that had once talked jumpy contractors off scaffolding 40 stories up. "On 3, I'm going to support your weight. You're going to unhook your foot. Understand?" She nodded, or tried to. Upside down, it looked more like a seizure. 1. He shifted his stance, distributing his weight. 2. His hand wrapped firmly around her ribcage. 3. She twisted her ankle free. Gravity did its job. Caleb caught her in a controlled descent that probably looked more graceful than it felt, his back screaming in protest as he absorbed her momentum and lowered her to the floor. She landed in a heap of limbs and humiliation, gasping like she'd surfaced from deep water. For a moment, neither of them moved. Caleb remained crouched beside her, his heart hammering against his ribs. Not from exertion, but from the delayed realization of what could have happened. Broken neck, crushed skull, permanent spinal damage. "Are you hurt?" he asked, scanning her for obvious injuries. "Just my pride," she wheezed, rolling onto her side. Then she looked up at him, and Caleb got his first real look at the woman he'd just saved from becoming a cautionary tale. Mid-20s, dark hair pulled into a ponytail that now hung sideways, wide brown eyes currently filled with equal parts gratitude and mortification, a spray of freckles across her nose that somehow made her look younger than she probably was. Pretty, his brain supplied unhelpfully. Very pretty. He shut that thought down immediately. Pretty wasn't relevant. Safety was relevant. "That bracket's been pulling out of the ceiling," he said, straightening up and examining the mounting point. The plaster around the bolts had cracked in a spiderweb pattern, and one bolt had loosened enough that he could see the gap. "How long have you been using this thing?" 3 months? She sat up slowly, testing her limbs like she didn't quite trust them. "I'm a yoga instructor. Well, trying to be. I teach online classes, and I needed the aerial silks for... It doesn't matter. I had it professionally installed." "By who? A drunk monkey?" Caleb reached up, testing the bracket with careful pressure. It shifted. Not much, maybe a 1/4 inch, but enough to make his jaw tighten. This wasn't mounted to a stud. Someone just drilled it into drywall and hoped for the best. "Oh," her voice got very small. "That's bad." "That's catastrophically negligent." He turned back to her, and something in his expression must have conveyed the seriousness because her face went pale. "You're lucky you didn't break your neck. Actually, you're lucky the whole assembly didn't rip out of the ceiling 3 weeks ago." She hugged her knees to her chest, suddenly looking very young and very vulnerable. "I can't afford to have it redone. I barely afforded it the first time." Caleb pinched the bridge of his nose. He'd come over here on pure instinct, still in his work clothes, button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, slacks that had seen better days, steel-toed boots he'd forgotten to change out of. He had a 6-year-old daughter asleep in his apartment who thought he was just grabbing something from the kitchen. He had exactly zero business getting involved in his neighbor's structural safety issues. "Do you have the installer's information?" he asked anyway, because apparently his mouth hadn't gotten the memo from his brain. "I think so. It was just some guy off Craigslist. He seemed to know what he was doing. Clearly." Caleb looked around the apartment for the first time, really looked. It was smaller than his unit, a studio configuration where his was a one-bedroom. She'd tried to make it warm, personal, tapestries on the walls in deep purples and golds, yoga mats stacked in the corner, a laptop set up near the window with a ring light, and what looked like a very cheap camera mount. This was her livelihood. This cramped studio with its dangerous ceiling brackets and its landlord's special paint job was where she tried to build something. He recognized that desperation. He'd lived it. "I'm Caleb," he said, offering his hand to help her up. "Caleb Ward. I live next door." "Mia Collins." She took his hand. Hers was smaller, calloused in unexpected places, strong despite the trembling. "And I'm usually much more coordinated than this. I swear I'm actually qualified to teach people yoga. I'll take your word for it." He pulled her to her feet, noting the way she swayed slightly before catching her balance. Adrenaline crash. He knew that feeling well. "You should sit down, drink some water. Your body just went through significant stress." "I'm fine. Really." But she sat anyway, on the edge of a futon that probably doubled as her bed, and accepted the water bottle he retrieved from her mini-fridge without asking. "Thank you for breaking down my door and saving my life. In that order. Door's not broken. Lock was cheap." Caleb examined it from the inside. Standard builder-grade garbage that had given way under pressure. Another thing that wasn't up to code. "You live alone?" "Yeah?" Something flickered across her face, defensiveness maybe, or wariness. "Why?" "Because this building's a lawsuit waiting to happen, and I'm trying to figure out if you're the only person in immediate danger or if I need to start knocking on every door." He wasn't trying to scare her, just stating facts, but the way her shoulders hunched told him he'd failed at the delivery. "It's not that bad," she said quietly. "I've lived here 8 months. Nothing's happened before tonight." "Nothing's happened yet." Caleb crouched down, studying the floorboards near where the silk rig hung. The wood looked sound enough on the surface, but there was something, a subtle unevenness, a slight give when he pressed his palm flat. He stood up, grabbed a chair from her tiny dining table, and climbed up to get a better look at the ceiling around the failed mount point. What he saw made his blood run cold. "Mia," he said carefully, keeping his voice level. "When's the last time you had any work done on this unit? Plumbing, electrical, anything?" "Never. I moved in as is." "Why? What's wrong?" Caleb climbed down, his mind already running calculations. "I need better light. Do you have a flashlight?" "Just my phone." That'll work." He took it when she offered, turned on the flashlight function, and went back up. The concentrated beam revealed what ambient lighting had hidden. Water staining in the drywall, the faint ghost of moisture damage radiating out from the mount point, and when he tested the ceiling with careful pressure, it flexed. Just slightly. Just enough. "You've got water damage," he said, stepping down. "Recent, probably. The drywall's been compromised. That's why the bracket's failing. It's not just bad installation. The material itself isn't structurally sound anymore." Mia set down her water bottle with the slow, deliberate movement of someone receiving very bad news. "What does that mean?" "It means you've got a leak somewhere above you." Caleb handed back her phone. "Could be the roof, could be plumbing from the unit above if there is one. There is. 8B. I think it's vacant, though." Which actually makes it worse because a leak in an empty unit could have been going for weeks without anyone noticing. He dragged a hand through his hair, a habit from his old life that he'd never quite broken. "You need to report this to your landlord immediately." "Darren Voss." She said the name like it tasted bad. "He's going to blame me. He's going to say I damaged it with the silk rig and try to charge me for repairs." "Let him try." Caleb's voice hardened. You've got water damage from a structural issue. That's on him, not you. Document everything, take photos, get it in writing. You don't understand. Mia stood up, wrapping her arms around herself. Darren's been looking for a reason to get rid of me since I moved in. My rent's locked in at the old rate before he bought the building and jacked everything up. If he can claim I damaged the unit, he can evict me and re-rent at market rate. I can't afford anywhere else in this neighborhood, and I need to be here for my studio location, for my students who come in person. She cut herself off, but not before Caleb heard what she wasn't saying. She was hanging on by her fingernails. One wrong move and she'd lose everything. He'd been there. Different circumstances, different stakes, but he knew that edge. He knew what it felt like to be one disaster away from freefall. Then we make sure he can't claim anything, Caleb said. First thing tomorrow, you email him with photos and a detailed explanation. You establish the timeline. The rig was fine until recently. You noticed the bracket loosening, and upon inspection, you discovered water damage. You're reporting it as a maintenance issue. And if he ignores me, then you escalate. Housing authority, tenants' rights organizations, whatever you need. He paused, recognizing the look on her face. Fear. Not of the leak or the damage, but of the fight, of standing up to someone who held all the cards. You can't just let this go, Mia. That water's coming from somewhere. It'll get worse. I know. She sank back down onto the futon. I know, I'm tired. I'm so tired of everything being a fight. Caleb understood that too. Understood it bone deep. Get some sleep, he said, moving toward the door he'd busted through. We'll figure it out tomorrow. Wait, Caleb? She looked up at him, and in that moment she reminded him powerfully of his daughter, that same wide-eyed vulnerability that made his chest tight. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. Good question. Caleb didn't have a good answer, or maybe he had too many answers, all of them tangled up in things he didn't want to examine too closely. So he went with the simplest truth. Because someone should, he said. Lock your door after me. The cheap one still works. He let himself out, crossed the hallway to his own unit in 4 steps, and slipped inside as quietly as he'd left. The apartment was silent except for the soft sound of his daughter's breathing from her room. He checked on her, still asleep, clutching the stuffed elephant he'd won for her at a street fair, and allowed himself one moment of relief that she'd slept through the drama. Then he went to his own room, opened his laptop, and started researching tenant rights in their city, because he'd made a promise, even if he hadn't said it out loud. And Caleb Ward didn't break promises. Not anymore. The email from Darren Voss arrived at 6:47 a.m., before Mia had even sent her own message. Caleb knew this because Mia knocked on his door at 6:52, looking like she'd slept about as well as he had, which was to say not at all. He's kicking me out, she said without preamble, shoving her phone at him. Caleb scanned the email, his jaw tightening with each line. Darren had somehow already discovered the damage, interesting timing, and was claiming it was the result of unauthorized modifications to the unit, the silk rig. He was citing lease violations and giving her 30 days to vacate. He can't do this, Mia said, her voice climbing toward panic. Can he do this? I looked at my lease and there's this clause about modifications, but I thought exercise equipment was okay. Breathe, Caleb interrupted, handing back the phone. Did you respond? No, I came straight here. I don't know what to say. Nothing yet. He glanced back into his apartment where Emma was still blessedly asleep, then grabbed his keys and phone. Let me look at your lease and the damage in daylight. They went back to her unit. In the cold morning light streaming through her single window, the problem looked worse. The water staining was more pronounced, the bulge in the ceiling more obvious. Caleb took photos from multiple angles while Mia pulled up her lease on her laptop. Show me the modification clause, he said, crouching to examine the floorboards more closely. She read it aloud. Tenant agrees not to make any structural modifications to the unit without prior written consent from the landlord. Did you get written consent for the silk rig? No, but I didn't think it's not structural, it's just ceiling mounts. Ceiling mounts are structural modifications. Caleb stood up, his knees popping in protest. 32 wasn't old, but sometimes his body disagreed. But here's the thing. Your landlord has a responsibility to maintain the structural integrity of the building. That supersedes pretty much everything else. He moved to the spot directly below where he'd seen the worst of the water damage, knelt down, pressed his palm flat against the floor, and felt it give. "Mia," he said quietly, "do you have a toolbox?" "I have a hammer and a screwdriver." "Why?" "Because I need to check something, and you're not going to like it." 10 minutes later, Caleb had pried up the corner of one floorboard, carefully, minimizing damage, and confirmed what he'd suspected. The subfloor beneath was wet. Not damp. Wet. The wood was dark with moisture, slightly spongy to the touch. "How bad is it?" Mia asked from behind him, her voice small. "Bad enough that you shouldn't be living here until it's fixed." Caleb sat back on his heels, thinking fast. This isn't just a ceiling leak. The water's been traveling through the structure. Could be days, could be weeks. Either way, there's probably mold growing in the walls, the subfloor's compromised, and if I had to guess, the joists are affected too. In English? "Your floor could collapse." He said it bluntly because she needed to understand. Maybe not today, maybe not this week, but structural rot doesn't get better. It gets worse. And if the unit above yours has the same problem, then the whole building's a problem, she finished. "Oh, this is perfect. This is just perfect. Darren's going to love this. He'll evict everyone, claim the building's condemned, and then he'll renovate and double the rent." She stopped mid-sentence, her face going pale. "That's his plan," she whispered. "That's why he wants me out. He's not fixing anything. He's waiting for it to get bad enough that he has an excuse to empty the building." Caleb had been thinking the same thing, but hearing her say it out loud made it real and infuriating. "Can you prove that?" he asked. "No, but I can prove he's ignored every maintenance request I've ever sent. I've got emails going back months. Broken heating, leaking toilet, that weird smell in the hallway. He's never fixed any of it." "Forward them to me." Caleb stood up, brushing off his hands. "All of them. And we're going to add this to the list. With photos, timestamps, everything." "Why? What good will that do?" "Because if he tries to evict you for modifications, you're going to counter with proof that he's been neglecting his legal duty to maintain habitable conditions. That's a much bigger problem for him than some ceiling mounts." Mia stared at him like he'd just spoken a foreign language. "You're serious? You really think we can fight this?" "I think you have no choice but to try." Caleb checked his watch, 7:15. Emma would be up soon, demanding breakfast and her usual complicated negotiation about what constituted appropriate school clothes. "I need to get my daughter ready for school, but send me everything you've got, and don't respond to Darren yet. Let him sweat." "Caleb?" She caught his arm as he turned to leave. "Why are you doing this? Really?" He could have deflected again, could have kept it light, impersonal, but something about the way she was looking at him, like he was the only solid thing in a world going liquid, made him tell the truth. "Because I spent 5 years watching people get crushed by systems they couldn't fight," he said. "Contractors who cut corners, developers who prioritize profit over safety, workers who got hurt because someone in a suit decided regulations were suggestions. I got tired of watching it happen." "What did you do before?" "Structural engineer, high-rise construction." He watched her eyes widen. "I was good at it, made a lot of money, lost everything that mattered." "Your wife?" she guessed quietly. "Ex-wife. She kept the house, the car, most of our friends. I kept Emma." He smiled without humor. "Best trade I ever made, even if it came with poverty and a one-bedroom apartment in a building with rotting joists." Mia's hand was still on his arm. She squeezed once, a gesture of understanding that somehow meant more than words. "Thank you," she said, "for not letting me fall. In any sense." "Thank me when we win," Caleb said, and went home to make pancakes for a 6-year-old who didn't know her father had just signed them up for a war. That's up. The next 48 hours unfolded like a masterclass in strategic combat. Mia sent her emails. Caleb documented everything: the water damage, the structural compromise, the pattern of neglect. He even managed to sweet-talk Mrs. Chen from 3A into admitting that her bathroom ceiling had been weeping for 6 weeks, and Darren had yet to respond to her complaints. Then they waited. Darren's response came Friday evening, and it was worse than expected. Not an email this time. A notice taped to Mia's door, but mandatory inspection, Monday, 9 a.m. "He's going to claim the place is uninhabitable," Mia said, pacing Caleb's apartment while Emma watched cartoons and pretended not to eavesdrop. He's going to use the damage as evidence, ignore that it's his fault, and evict me anyway. Probably, Caleb agreed, scanning the notice. Unless the damage is fixed before he gets here. Mia stopped pacing. Fixed? Caleb, we're talking about structural rot. You said yourself it could affect the joists. That's not a weekend DIY project. No, he agreed. It's a weekend emergency repair job. Temporary stabilization, cosmetic cleanup, enough to pass a cursory inspection. You're insane. I'm experienced. He set down the notice. I've supervised emergency repairs on buildings 40 stories tall with deadlines measured in hours. I can stabilize a studio apartment floor in 2 days. By yourself? With help. He looked at her meaningfully. If you're willing. Mia glanced at Emma, who was definitely listening now, despite her convincing performance of cartoon absorption. You have a kid, who will be at her mother's this weekend. Which was true. His ex-wife had visitation every other weekend, and this was her rotation. Providence or just dumb luck, Caleb wasn't sure. So I'm free to do something monumentally stupid for a neighbor I barely know. Why? Mia asked for the third time in as many days. This time Caleb had an answer ready, because he'd been thinking about it, examining his motives, trying to figure out why he was willing to sacrifice his weekend, his resources, maybe even his safety for someone he'd met 3 days ago during a yoga emergency. Because it's the right thing to do, he said simply. Because I have skills that can help, and because... He paused, choosing his words carefully while Emma pretended not to listen. Because I'm tired of being the guy who just survives. I want to be the guy who fixes things again. Mia studied his face for a long moment. Then she nodded. Okay, she said. Tell me what we need. They started Saturday at dawn. Caleb arrived at Mia's door with a toolbox that had cost him most of his emergency savings, borrowed a moisture meter from a former colleague who owed him a favor, and enough determination to power a small city. First step, he said, setting down his equipment. We map the damage. Every square foot of ceiling, floor, and walls. We need to know exactly how bad it is before we can fix it. The answer turned out to be very bad. The moisture extended across roughly 40% of the ceiling, with the worst concentration around the original silk rig mount point. The floor damage affected 2 separate areas, one directly below the ceiling leak and another near the bathroom that suggested a separate plumbing issue. 2 problems, Caleb muttered, making notes. Roof leak and pipe leak. Fantastic. Can we fix both? Mia asked. She'd pulled her hair back in a practical ponytail and changed into clothes she clearly didn't care about. Paint-stained yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt. Ready to work. We can stabilize both. Actually, fixing them requires access to the roof and the plumbing chase, which we don't have. He stood up, surveying the space with a critical eye. But we can treat the mold, reinforce the subfloor, patch the drywall, and make it look sound enough to pass inspection. That's not lying? It's temporary triage. Caleb met her eyes. The building needs real repairs, Mia. This is just buying you time to fight for them without getting kicked out first. She nodded slowly. Okay. Where do we start? They started with the floor. Caleb had done this kind of work before, years ago, when he was still learning the trade. The dirty, hands-on labor that most engineers never touched once they had their credentials. He'd spent a summer with a restoration crew, learning how to salvage water-damaged structures. That knowledge came back now, muscle memory taking over. First, they pulled up the compromised floorboards, exposing the wet subfloor beneath. The wood was dark, swollen, soft in places where rot had begun to set in. We need to dry this out, Caleb explained, setting up a borrowed dehumidifier. Fast. Then we treat it with mold killer, reinforce any weak joists, and install new subflooring over the damaged sections. And the ceiling? Same principle. Cut out the wet drywall, dry the cavity, treat for mold, patch it back up. Mia looked at the scope of work, then at Caleb. This is impossible. It's improbable, he corrected. Impossible is what I did for a living. This is just really, really difficult. They worked through the morning, falling into a rhythm. Caleb did the technical work, cutting, measuring, testing structural integrity. Mia became his extra set of hands, holding materials, passing tools, learning on the fly. Around noon, she ran out for sandwiches. They ate sitting on her futon, covered in drywall dust and wood shavings, not talking much because they were both too tired. "Can I ask you something?" Mia said finally, breaking the companionable silence. "Sure." "What happened? With your job, I mean." "You don't have to answer if it's—" "No, it's fine." Caleb took a long drink of water, organizing his thoughts. "I blew the whistle on a contractor who was cutting corners on a residential tower. Substandard materials, falsified inspections, the works. Building would have been a death trap in an earthquake." "That's good, isn't it? You saved lives." "I ended careers, including my own." He smiled without humor. "Turns out the contractor was connected to the development firm I worked for. My boss gave me a choice: recant my findings or resign. I chose wrong, depending on your perspective." "You chose right," Mia said fiercely. "Those people would have died." "Maybe. Probably. But I lost everything anyway. My marriage couldn't survive the financial stress. My reputation in the industry was shot. No one wants to hire the engineer who rats out contractors. So now I do freelance safety inspections for barely minimum wage and raise my daughter in a building that's falling apart." He laughed, bitter. "The irony's not lost on me." Mia was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, "Your ex-wife left you because you did the right thing?" "She left because I chose the right thing over our financial security, over her comfort. I don't blame her." But his voice suggested maybe he did, a little. "I think she's an idiot," Mia said bluntly. "And I think Emma's lucky to have you." Something in Caleb's chest loosened, just a fraction. "Thanks." They went back to work. By evening, they'd made significant progress. The subfloor was drying, the joists were reinforced with temporary supports, and the worst of the ceiling damage had been cut out and treated. Tomorrow they'd patch, paint, and pray. Caleb stood in the middle of the gutted apartment, checking his measurements one more time. The structural integrity was sound enough for now. Not perfect, not even good by professional standards, but safe. Functional. "We're going to make it," he said, more to himself than to Mia. "You sound surprised." "I'm always surprised when the math works out in real life." He turned to her, taking in the woman who'd spent 12 hours doing manual labor without complaint. Drywall dust in her hair, paint on her cheek, exhaustion written in every line of her body. "You did good today. I mostly just handed you things and tried not to break anything. You trusted me. That's harder." Their eyes met across the demolished studio, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. Two people who'd been knocked down learning how to stand back up. Mia broke the moment first, looking away. "You should go. It's late. You must be exhausted." He was, bone-deep, muscle-aching tired in a way he hadn't felt since his construction days. It felt good. Honest. "Tomorrow," he said. "Early. We finish this." "Tomorrow," Mia agreed. Caleb let himself out, crossed to his own apartment, and collapsed into bed still wearing his work clothes. His last thought before sleep claimed him was that he hadn't felt this alive in 5 years. Dangerous thought. He'd worry about it tomorrow. Sunday morning brought rain. Caleb woke to the sound of it hammering against his window and immediately thought, roof leak. If Mia's ceiling was compromised and it was raining hard enough, he was dressed and across the hall in under 2 minutes. "It's fine," Mia said when she opened the door, reading his expression. "I've got buckets under the worst spots. The dehumidifier's running. We're okay." But she didn't look okay. She looked worried, and when Caleb followed her inside, he saw why. The rain wasn't just coming through the ceiling. It was coming through the walls. Moisture was seeping through the drywall in multiple locations, dark stains spreading like bruises, following paths they hadn't identified yesterday. The damage was worse than they'd thought. Much worse. "We can't patch this," Mia said quietly. "Can we?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. He was too busy recalculating, reassessing, running through worst-case scenarios. The water was traveling through the entire structural cavity. That meant the problem wasn't localized. It was systemic. "No," he said finally. "We can't patch this. This building needs a full envelope inspection and major remediation." So Darren wins. He gets to call it condemned, kick everyone out. Not if we document that this is happening now in real time while he's ignoring it. Caleb pulled out his phone, started taking photos. "This isn't your fault. This isn't even about your silk rig anymore. This is proof that the building has serious defects that the landlord has failed to address. Proof that gets me evicted tomorrow when he sees it. Or proof that forces him to actually fix the problem. Caleb kept shooting, capturing every stain, every drip. Mia, listen to me. If this building is genuinely unsafe, you should be evicted. Everyone should. That's not failure. That's the system working. Easy for you to say. You're not the one losing your home. She was right. He wasn't. And he had no right to be calm about this when her entire life was dissolving like wet drywall. You're right, he said, lowering his phone. I'm sorry. This is your fight, not mine. Tell me what you want to do. Mia wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the water damage like it was a living thing. A monster. When she spoke, her voice was very small. I want to not be so tired, she said. I want to stop fighting for things that should be basic rights. I want someone else to carry this for 5 minutes so I can just breathe. Caleb understood that feeling. He'd lived that feeling every day since his marriage collapsed, and he'd become the sole support system for a child who deserved better than survival mode. Okay, he said, then let me carry it, today, right now. You sit down, drink some water, and let me think. Caleb, I'm serious. He guided her to the futon, gently pushed her down onto it. I'm going to make some calls. I've got contacts at the housing authority, friends who owe me favors. We're going to document everything, file an emergency complaint, and force Darren to respond before tomorrow's inspection. You're going to rest. I don't need rest. I need solutions. Rest is the solution sometimes. He grabbed a blanket from her bed, tossed it over her. Trust me, please. She looked up at him with those wide brown eyes, and Caleb saw the exact moment she decided to let go, to trust him. It was a look he recognized. Emma gave him that same look every time he promised the monsters weren't real. Okay, Mia whispered. Okay. Caleb spent the next 3 hours making it right. He called his old supervisor from the engineering firm, the one who'd tried to convince him not to blow the whistle, but who'd also admitted Caleb had been right. Called in that lingering guilt and got the name of an independent building inspector who could do emergency evaluations. Called the housing authority, navigated their labyrinth of bureaucracy, and filed a formal complaint about uninhabitable conditions. Got a case number. Got promises of investigation. Called a tenant rights lawyer he'd met at Emma's school, a mom he'd helped with a playground safety issue. She owed him a consult. She gave him 3. By noon, Caleb had built a paper trail that would make it very difficult for Darren Voss to claim ignorance or blame. By 1 p.m., the independent inspector had arrived, taken one look at the ongoing water intrusion, and declared the unit unsafe for occupancy pending full investigation. By 2 p.m., Mia was officially displaced, and Caleb was helping her pack an overnight bag because there was no way she was staying in a place that was literally leaking from multiple structural points. Where am I supposed to go? She asked, shoving clothes into a duffel with shaking hands. I can't afford a hotel, even for a few nights. My place, Caleb said. I've got a couch. It's not much, but it's dry. Mia froze mid-pack. I can't ask you to do that. You didn't ask. I offered. He took the duffel from her, started folding clothes properly because her panic packing was creating more chaos than efficiency. Mia, be practical. You need a place to stay until this gets sorted. I've got space. Emma's at her mom's until Tuesday. It's the obvious solution. It's too much. You've already done too much. Then what's a little more? He zipped the duffel, handed it back. Come on, before the ceiling actually falls in. They left apartment 7B with buckets still catching rain and moisture creeping down the walls like spreading disease. Crossed the hall to 7A, which was shabby but dry, small but safe. Caleb showed her where the towels were, how the shower worked, which cabinet held the coffee. Gave her privacy and space and the quiet dignity of not making a big deal out of her accepting help. Thank you, she said when he'd finished the tour. For all of it. I know I keep saying it, but I don't know what else. You don't have to say anything. Caleb sat down on the edge of his ratty armchair, suddenly feeling every hour of the last 3 days. We're neighbors. This is what neighbors do. No, Mia said firmly. This is what good people do. Neighbors just complain about parking. He laughed at that, surprised into it. Fair point. They spent the rest of Sunday in comfortable silence. Mia on the couch catching up on work emails, Caleb reviewing the inspector's preliminary report and preparing for tomorrow's confrontation with Darren. The rain continued outside, a steady percussion that should have been soothing but just reminded Caleb of everything still going wrong in the building around them. Around 6, he ordered pizza because neither of them had the energy to cook. They ate it straight from the box, trading slices and tired observations about their respective disasters. "What happens tomorrow?" Mia asked eventually. "When Darren shows up for the inspection?" "He's going to be met by a building inspector with an emergency violation notice," Caleb said. "He's going to be very unhappy. He's going to retaliate. Against me, maybe against you. Let him try." Caleb's voice hardened. "I've got documentation, witnesses, legal backing. If he wants a fight, I'll give him one." Mia studied him across the pizza box, something unreadable in her expression. "You're different when you talk about this. Harder. This is who I used to be before I got tired." He met her gaze. "Maybe I'm just remembering how to fight again." "I'm glad," she said quietly. "Someone should know how to fight. I never learned." "Then we'll learn together," Caleb said, and meant it. They finished the pizza, cleaned up together, moving around each other in the small kitchen with unexpected ease. Caleb set her up with blankets on the couch, made sure she had everything she needed. "Good night," he said from his bedroom doorway. "Tomorrow's going to be intense. Get some sleep." "Caleb?" She sat up, illuminated by the streetlight through his window. "Why are you really doing this? And don't say because it's right. There's something else." He could have deflected, should have. But it was late and he was tired and she'd trusted him with her safety, so maybe he owed her this truth. "Because you remind me of what it's like to care about something enough to fight for it," he said. "I lost that. Somewhere between the divorce and the poverty and the constant survival mode, I forgot how to care about anything except Emma, and then I heard you scream, and I remembered what it felt like to act instead of endure." "So I'm your redemption arc?" A hint of humor in her voice, gentle teasing. "Maybe we're both each other's redemption arc," Caleb said. "Good night, Mia." "Good night." He closed his door, climbed into bed, and stared at the ceiling, wondering what the hell he was doing and why it felt so much like the first right thing he'd done in years. Outside, the rain continued. Inside, for the first time in a long time, Caleb Ward felt like maybe, just maybe, he'd found something worth holding on to. Even if that something was just a neighbor with terrible yoga equipment and a landlord from hell. It was a start. Monday morning arrived with the kind of cold clarity that made bad situations feel worse. Caleb woke at 5:30, his internal alarm clock refusing to acknowledge that he'd barely slept. Through his bedroom wall, he could hear the soft sounds of Mia moving around in his living room, the creak of the couch springs, the shuffle of feet on worn carpet, the hesitant opening of cabinet doors as she tried to find coffee without waking him. He stayed in bed for another minute, staring at the ceiling and running through every possible outcome of the day ahead. Darren would arrive at 9. The building inspector would be there by 9:15 if Caleb's contact had followed through. Everything hinged on timing, documentation, and Caleb's ability to stay 3 steps ahead of a landlord who'd been playing this game a lot longer. No pressure. He dragged himself out of bed, pulled on jeans and a button-down shirt that he hoped looked more professional than desperate, and emerged to find Mia standing in his kitchen, looking lost. "I couldn't figure out the coffee maker," she admitted, gesturing helplessly at his ancient drip machine. "I didn't want to break anything." "It's temperamental," Caleb said, moving past her to fill the reservoir. "You have to jiggle the filter basket or it overflows. Learned that the hard way." "How long have you lived here?" 2 years, since the divorce." He measured grounds with practiced efficiency, hit the brew button. "It was supposed to be temporary. Turns out temporary has a way of becoming permanent when you're broke." Mia leaned against the counter, watching him with those analytical eyes that seemed to see more than he wanted to show. She'd changed into fresh clothes, dark jeans, a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look younger and somehow more vulnerable. Ready for battle, but not sure she'd survive it. "What's the plan?" she asked quietly. "We meet Darren at your unit. You let him in with your key. That's important. We're not breaking any rules. The inspector should arrive shortly after. Darren discovers he's being evaluated by an independent third party with the authority to issue violations. He gets angry, probably threatens legal action, definitely tries to intimidate you. You say nothing. I do the talking." "Why you?" Because I know the building codes, and he doesn't. Because I've dealt with his type before, and you haven't. Because, he paused, searching for the right words. Because you've been fighting alone long enough. The coffee maker sputtered to life, filling the kitchen with the smell of cheap grounds and false optimism. Caleb poured 2 mugs, handed her one, watched her wrap both hands around it like she was trying to absorb its warmth. I'm scared, she said simply. Is that stupid? It's smart. Fear means you understand what's at stake. He took a long drink of coffee that was too hot and too bitter, but at least was caffeine. But scared doesn't mean helpless. Remember that. They drank in silence while the clock ticked toward confrontation. At 8:45, they crossed the hall to apartment 7B. The smell hit them immediately, that distinct odor of water damage and mold growth, musty and wrong. Mia's hand shook slightly as she unlocked the door. Inside, the situation had somehow gotten worse overnight. The buckets they'd positioned were overflowing despite the rain having stopped. New water stains had appeared on the walls, dark and spreading. One section of ceiling near the bathroom was sagging visibly, the drywall pregnant with trapped moisture. This is really bad, Mia whispered. This is evidence, Caleb corrected, already taking photos with his phone. He documented everything methodically. The water damage, the structural sagging, the mold growth visible in the corners where humidity had condensed. Each image time-stamped and geotagged, building an irrefutable record. At 8:58, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Darren Voss was exactly what Caleb had expected. Mid-50s, expensive suit that didn't quite hide the softness around his middle. Practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. The kind of man who'd learned to weaponize charm and call it business. Ms. Collins, he said, nodding to Mia with false warmth. Then his gaze shifted to Caleb, and the smile cooled several degrees. And you are? Caleb Ward, I live in 7A. He didn't offer his hand. A neighbor. How nice. Darren's tone suggested it wasn't nice at all. I wasn't aware this inspection required an audience. I asked him to be here, Mia said, her voice steadier than Caleb had expected. For support. Of course. Darren stepped into the apartment, and Caleb watched his expression shift as he took in the damage. Not surprise, recognition. The look of someone seeing exactly what they'd expected to see. Well, this is worse than I thought. Is it? Caleb asked mildly. Because my understanding is that Ms. Collins has been reporting water damage and maintenance issues for months with no response. Darren's attention snapped to him, reassessing. I'm sorry, Mr. Ward, but this conversation is between myself and my tenant. Unless you have some official capacity here? Actually, I do. A new voice from the doorway. A woman in her 40s, carrying a clipboard and wearing a jacket with the City Housing Authority logo. I'm Inspector Sarah Chen. I'm here to evaluate habitability conditions following an emergency complaint filed yesterday. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Darren's professional mask slipped just for a second, revealing something harder underneath. Then it was back, smooth as ever. I see. Ms. Collins, I wish you'd communicated your concerns directly to me instead of involving the authorities. We could have resolved this amicably. She tried, Caleb said flatly. Multiple emails, multiple calls, months of ignored maintenance requests, all documented. And you are her lawyer? Darren's smile had teeth now. I'm an engineer, structural specialist, which means I know exactly what I'm looking at, and I know it's been developing for a long time. Caleb moved aside to let Inspector Chen enter. The ceiling damage, the floor compromise, the mold growth, this isn't recent failure. This is systematic neglect. Inspector Chen was already taking her own photos, making notes on her clipboard with brisk efficiency. She tested the sagging ceiling with careful pressure, examined the water stains, crouched to inspect the floor where Caleb had pulled up boards 2 days ago. How long has this unit been in this condition? She asked, directing the question to Mia. I first noticed the ceiling leak about 6 weeks ago, Mia said, her voice gaining strength. I reported it to Mr. Voss 3 times. No response. Then the floor started feeling soft near the bathroom about 3 weeks ago. Another report. No response. It got worse after heavy rain this weekend. And the mold? Inspector Chen pointed to the visible growth in the corner. That appeared within the last week. Actually, Caleb interjected, If you look closely at the pattern, the mold growth suggests it's been developing longer than a week, probably 2 to 3 weeks at minimum. It was just hidden behind the drywall until the moisture content got high enough to penetrate through. Inspector Chen gave him a sharp look. You said you're an engineer? Structural. Used to work high-rise construction. I've seen this kind of deterioration pattern before. He pulled up his phone, showed her his photo documentation. I've been tracking the progression since Friday when Ms. Collins first asked for my help. You can see how rapidly it's degraded. She studied the photos, her expression growing grimmer. Mr. Voss, when was your last building-wide inspection? I'd have to check my records, Darren said smoothly, but I can assure you all required inspections have been conducted and filed with the appropriate agencies. Then you should have been aware of water intrusion issues. Inspector Chen walked to the window, looked up at the ceiling corner where the worst damage was concentrated. This kind of failure doesn't happen overnight. The roofing membrane or flashing has likely been compromised for months, possibly years. With respect, Inspector, I can't be held responsible for hidden defects. You can be held responsible for ignoring reported defects. She turned back to him, and Caleb saw the moment Darren realized this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. Ms. Collins, I'm going to need copies of all your maintenance requests. Mr. Ward, I'd like you to walk me through your structural assessment. Mr. Voss, you're welcome to stay, but I need to inform you that based on preliminary observation, I'm likely to issue an emergency violation for uninhabitable conditions. You can't do that, Darren said, the professional veneer cracking. I have rights as a property owner, and your tenants have rights to safe, habitable housing. Inspector Chen's voice was polite steel, which this currently is not. Now, shall we proceed with the inspection? The next hour was a masterclass in systematic demolition. Inspector Chen was thorough, methodical, and utterly unimpressed by Darren's attempts at explanation. She documented every water stain, every structural compromise, every code violation. Caleb provided technical context, explaining load-bearing concerns and moisture infiltration patterns in language she understood, and Darren clearly didn't. Mia supplied the paper trail. Months of ignored emails, timestamp after timestamp, proving she'd tried to get help and been systematically dismissed. By 10:30, Inspector Chen had seen enough. Mr. Voss, she said, writing on her clipboard with decisive strokes, I'm issuing an immediate violation for uninhabitable conditions. This unit cannot be occupied until remediation is complete and verified. Additionally, given the pattern of water damage, I'm requiring inspection of all units in the vertical stack above and below this one. If similar conditions exist elsewhere, we may be looking at a building-wide issue. Darren's face had gone an interesting shade of red. This is ridiculous. One tenant's complaint, and you're threatening to shut down my entire building? One tenant's documented complaint following months of ignored requests, combined with visible evidence of serious structural defects. Inspector Chen handed him a copy of the violation. You have 72 hours to provide a remediation plan. During that time, Ms. Collins will need to be relocated at your expense as per state tenant protection laws. I'm not paying for a hotel, then you're in violation of tenant displacement provisions, which carries additional penalties. She turned to Mia. Do you have somewhere safe to stay? She's staying with me, Caleb said before Mia could answer. Until this is resolved. Inspector Chen made a note. That's acceptable as a temporary solution, though, Ms. Collins, you should be aware that you're entitled to compensation for displacement, even if you're not incurring hotel costs. I don't want his money, Mia said quietly. I just want my home fixed. Understood. Mr. Voss, I'll need access to Unit 8B above this one. Do you have keys? It's vacant, Darren said tightly. Then it should be easy to inspect. Inspector Chen waited, implacable. Darren looked like he wanted to refuse, but even he could see the corner he was backed into. He pulled out a key ring with visible reluctance, selected a key. Fine, let's get this over with. They went upstairs as a group, Inspector Chen, Darren, Caleb, and Mia. The hallway on the 8th floor was identical to the 7th, same worn carpet and flickering lights. Darren unlocked 8B with jerky movements that betrayed his anger. The smell hit them before the door was fully open. Mold, heavy, pervasive, the kind that meant serious infestation. Inspector Chen pulled out a respirator mask from her bag, offered extras to the rest of them. Caleb took one, helped Mia fasten hers. Then followed the inspector inside. If 7B was bad, 8B was catastrophic. The unit was completely unoccupied, but it looked like a disaster zone. Water damage covered nearly every surface. The ceiling was a mess of stains and sags. The floor had visible rot in multiple places. Mold grew in thick patches on the walls, black and green and toxic. "When did this unit become vacant?" Inspector Chen asked, her voice muffled by the mask. Darren didn't answer immediately. Caleb turned to look at him, saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. What to admit, what to deny, what could be proven. "About 4 months ago," Darren finally said. "And you didn't notice this?" Inspector Chen gestured at the obvious, extensive damage. "I haven't had reason to enter it. The tenant left. I haven't shown it yet." "Because it's uninhabitable," Caleb cut in. "This much damage didn't happen in 4 months. This is years of neglect." He walked carefully into the bathroom, where the floor felt spongy under his boots. "Inspector, you should see this." The bathroom was worse than the main room. The ceiling around the toilet had collapsed partially, exposing rotted joists and moldy insulation. The toilet itself was disconnected, sitting askew. Water stains suggested it had been leaking for a very long time. "This is your source," Caleb said, pointing. "The toilet flange failed, probably years ago. Water's been leaking into the floor cavity, traveling down through the structure into 7B below." Inspector Chen photographed everything with grim determination. "Mr. Voss, this constitutes severe neglect. You've allowed a major plumbing failure to compromise the structural integrity of at least 2 units, possibly more." "I wasn't aware. Your tenant awareness doesn't negate your legal obligation to maintain the property." She lowered her camera. "I'm expanding the violation to include this unit and recommending a full building inspection. You'll be hearing from the Housing Authority's legal team." Darren's professional mask shattered completely. "This is harassment. That tenant," he jabbed a finger toward Mia, "damaged her unit with unauthorized modifications, and now she's using city resources to avoid consequences. I know my rights. I'll be filing complaints against her and against anyone who's interfering in my legal business." "File away," Inspector Chen said, unmoved. "But unless you can show me evidence that Ms. Collins installed a leaking toilet in the unit above hers 2 years before she moved in, your complaint won't hold much weight." "She's been a problem since day one. Below market rent, constant complaints, interfering with other tenants. I've never interfered with anyone." Mia's voice cut through his, sharp with anger. "I pay my rent on time every month. I've never caused problems. All I did was ask you to fix things that were already broken. You want to play victim? Fine. But we both know what this is really about." Darren stepped closer to her, using his height as intimidation. "You thought you could get me to drop your rent even lower by threatening me with code violations. You found some engineer boyfriend to back up your claims." Caleb moved between them before he consciously decided to, his body operating on pure protective instinct. "Step back. Or what?" Darren smiled without humor. "You going to threaten me? Assault me? Go ahead. I'd love to add that to my lawsuit." "I'm not going to threaten you," Caleb said quietly, his voice dropping into that dangerous calm he'd learned in his construction days when dealing with contractors who put workers at risk. "I'm going to remind you that we're standing in a room full of evidence that you've been systematically negligent in your duty to maintain safe housing, that you've ignored repeated requests for repairs while collecting rent on uninhabitable units, and that threatening your tenants in front of a city inspector is probably not your smartest move." Something in his tone must have registered because Darren backed up half a step. Inspector Chen cleared her throat. "Gentlemen, Mr. Voss, you'll receive the full violation report within 24 hours. I suggest you consult with a lawyer and a licensed contractor about remediation. Collins, you'll receive information about your rights and available resources for displaced tenants. Mr. Ward, thank you for your technical assistance." She herded them all out of the toxic apartment, locked it behind them with Darren's keys, and handed them back with an expression that suggested she'd seen this movie before and knew exactly how it ended. "I'll be in touch," she said, and left them standing in the hallway. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Darren turned to Mia, and his voice was ice. "You've just cost yourself your home, Ms. Collins. I hope it was worth it." "She already lost her home when you let it rot from the inside out," Caleb said. "Now she's just making sure you can't do it to anyone else." Darren looked at him with pure contempt. You think you're a hero? You're just another broke tenant in a building that's about to get a lot more expensive. When I'm done renovating, neither of you will be able to afford to stay. So enjoy your moral victory while it lasts. He walked away, his expensive shoes clicking on the cheap tile, leaving the smell of mold and threats hanging in the air. Mia waited until he was gone before she started shaking. Hey, Caleb said gently, touching her shoulder. You did good. That was incredibly brave. I don't feel brave, I feel sick. She wrapped her arms around herself. He's going to evict me. He's going to evict everyone and turn this place into luxury condos, and I just handed him the excuse. He was always going to do that. You know that. Caleb guided her toward the stairs, away from the 8th floor with its toxic air and broken promises. But now there's a paper trail. Now there's documentation. He can't just sweep this under the rug and pretend everything's fine. He can make my life hell until then. Let him try. They reached the 7th floor, stood outside their respective apartments like mirror images of displacement. Mia, look at me. She did, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. You're not alone in this, Caleb said. Whatever happens next, whatever Darren tries, you've got backup, you've got evidence, you've got rights, and you've got me. Why? The question again, but this time it came out broken. Why do you care so much? Because she reminded him of who he used to be, someone who fought for what was right, even when it cost everything. Because helping her felt like reclaiming a piece of himself he'd lost in the wreckage of his old life. Because somewhere between yoga emergencies and structural failures, she'd become more than just a neighbor. But he couldn't say any of that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because someone should, he said instead. Go pack anything you need from your place. We'll figure out next steps over coffee in my kitchen where the ceiling isn't about to collapse. She laughed, watery and exhausted. Your place isn't much better. Yeah, but my ceiling has already collapsed and been repaired. We're ahead of the curve. He unlocked his door, held it open. Come on, before Darren decides to stage a dramatic confrontation in the hallway. They spent the rest of the day in strategic planning mode, spread out across Caleb's small living room with laptops and legal documents and too much coffee. Mia forwarded every email she'd ever sent to Darren about maintenance issues, 23 separate requests over 8 months, all ignored or dismissed. Caleb compiled his structural assessment into a formal report, complete with photos and technical analysis that would hold up under legal scrutiny. By evening, they had a case. A solid, documented, irrefutable case that Darren Voss had been systematically negligent in his duty to maintain the building. What do we do with this? Mia asked, staring at the pile of evidence like it might bite her. Tomorrow, we file a formal complaint with the tenant rights organization. We request an attorney through their legal aid program. We make copies of everything and store them in multiple locations in case Darren tries anything clever. Caleb closed his laptop, rubbed his eyes. And we prepare for a fight that's going to get ugly. It's already ugly. It's going to get uglier. He looked at her seriously. Darren's going to retaliate. He'll look for any excuse to make your life difficult. Late rent claims, noise complaints, whatever he can manufacture. You need to be perfect from here on out. Every rent payment documented, every interaction recorded, every rule followed to the letter. I've always been perfect. It didn't help. It will now. Because now you've got documentation and witnesses. Caleb stood up, stretched his back until it popped. I know this is overwhelming. I know you're tired of fighting, but you're doing everything right, Mia. Don't lose sight of that. She looked up at him from the couch, and something shifted in her expression, exhaustion giving way to determination. You really think we can win this? I think we can make him accountable, which is close enough to winning for me. He headed toward the kitchen. You want dinner? I make a mean grilled cheese. A mean grilled cheese, she repeated, something like amusement creeping into her voice. That's your signature dish? I'm a single dad living on a budget. Grilled cheese is gourmet cuisine in my world. He pulled out bread and cheese, started assembling. Besides, comfort food is underrated when your life's falling apart. Mia joined him in the kitchen, leaning against the counter in that way that was becoming familiar. Can I help? You can tell me about your yoga business, Caleb said, buttering bread with more attention than it required. The parts that don't involve dangerous ceiling installations. So she did. talked about how she'd started teaching online during the pandemic, built a small but loyal following, saved enough to get her certification and start offering in-person classes. How she'd been trying to grow the business into something sustainable, something that could support her without a day job. That's why I needed the silk rig, she explained, watching him work. Aerial yoga is trending. I could charge more for those classes, attract a different clientele. It was supposed to be my breakthrough. It still could be, Caleb said, flipping sandwiches in the pan. Once you're settled somewhere safe with proper ceiling support that won't try to kill you. If I can afford anywhere safe, she said it matter-of-factly without self-pity. Market rate in this city is insane. I was only managing because Darren hadn't raised my rent yet. Now you've got a displaced tenant claim that entitles you to compensation, Caleb reminded her. And a legal case that might result in a settlement. You've got options, even if they're not obvious yet. The grilled cheese sizzled in the pan, golden and perfect. Caleb plated them, cut them diagonally because that's what Emma insisted made them taste better, and handed one to Mia. They ate standing in the kitchen, not talking much, just existing in the quiet space of shared crisis and unexpected partnership. "This is really good," Mia said eventually, surprised. "Told you. Gourmet." She smiled, and Caleb felt something ease in his chest. This was helping, not just the food, but the normalcy of it. The reminder that life continued even when everything else was chaos. His phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, then reconsidered and answered. "Caleb Ward." "Mr. Ward, this is Attorney James Mitchell from the Tenant Rights Organization. I understand you assisted with a case today involving habitability violations?" Caleb straightened, caught Mia's attention with a look. "Yes. Mia Collins in apartment 7B. Multiple code violations, systematic neglect, displacement issues. I've received the inspector's preliminary report. I'd like to take Ms. Collins's case pro bono if she's interested. This is exactly the kind of landlord negligence we're looking to prosecute." "Hold on." Caleb put the phone on speaker, set it between them. "Mia's here. You want to talk to her directly?" For the next 20 minutes, they listened to Attorney Mitchell outline a legal strategy that was simultaneously encouraging and terrifying. He could file claims for habitability violations, improper displacement, constructive eviction, and possibly even personal injury given the dangerous conditions Mia had been living in. The case was strong. The documentation was solid. Darren Voss was in serious legal jeopardy. "What's the catch?" Mia asked, because she'd clearly learned that good news always came with conditions. "The catch is that this will take time," Mitchell said honestly. "Months, possibly longer, during which you'll need stable housing and income. Mr. Voss will likely attempt to settle to avoid court, but settlement negotiations can be lengthy. Can you sustain yourself during that period?" Mia looked at Caleb, a question in her eyes. He nodded without hesitation. "I can manage," she said. "I have resources." The lie was gentle, and Mitchell was kind enough not to call it out. "Good. I'll file the initial complaint tomorrow. Expect retaliation. Mr. Voss strikes me as the type. Document everything. Record every interaction. Don't give him ammunition." "We won't," Caleb promised. "Thank you for taking this on." "Thank you for the documentation. Cases like this are much easier when the evidence is already compiled." Mitchell paused. "Ms. Collins, I know this is stressful. Try to remember that you're doing the right thing, not just for yourself, but for every tenant who might rent from Mr. Voss in the future." After he hung up, the kitchen felt very quiet. "That was real," Mia said finally. "This is really happening." "Yeah." Caleb picked up their empty plates, started washing them in the sink because movement helped him think. "You can still back out, no judgment." "Can I?" She joined him at the sink, took a dish towel, started drying. "Because it feels like I'm on a train that's already left the station. There's always an emergency brake. And what happens when I pull it? Darren still owns the building. The damage is still there. Other tenants are still at risk." She set down a dried plate with more force than necessary. "I didn't ask for this fight, Caleb, but now that I'm in it, I can't just walk away." "No," he agreed quietly. "I don't think you can." They finished the dishes in silence, moving around each other with practiced ease. Two people who'd been strangers 4 days ago, now navigating shared space like they'd been doing it for years. Caleb's phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from his ex-wife. Running late. We'll have Emma back by 8 p.m. Tuesday instead of tomorrow night. Hope that's okay. He typed back a quick confirmation, tried not to feel relieved at the extra day. Emma complicated things. Not because he didn't want her home, but because explaining to a 6-year-old why the neighbor lady was sleeping on their couch was going to require diplomatic skills he wasn't sure he possessed. Everything okay? Mia asked, reading his expression. Just my ex. Emma's staying an extra day. He pocketed the phone. Which means you've got the couch until Tuesday at least. I should start looking for somewhere else to stay. I can't keep imposing. You're not imposing. You're recovering from displacement caused by landlord negligence. There's a difference. He said it firmly, cutting off her protest before it could build momentum. Mia, seriously, stay. At least until we have a better plan. She studied his face, searching for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because she nodded. Okay, but I'm buying groceries and cooking actual food that isn't grilled cheese. I'm not going to argue with that. The rest of Monday evening passed in quiet domesticity. Mia worked on her laptop, answering emails from yoga students and rescheduling classes. Caleb reviewed building codes and drafted a supplemental report for Attorney Mitchell. They existed in parallel, comfortable silence, broken only by the occasional question or observation. Around 10, Mia closed her laptop with a sigh. I should try to sleep. Big day tomorrow. Yeah. Caleb stood, grabbed the extra blankets he'd set aside. Bathroom's all yours. Towels are in the cabinet. If you need anything, I'll figure it out. She took the blankets, hesitated. Caleb, thank you for all of it. I don't think I've said that enough. You've said it plenty. He smiled tiredly. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we start fighting back for real. She disappeared into the bathroom. Caleb heard the water running, the soft sounds of evening routine. He retreated to his bedroom, changed into sleep clothes, tried to quiet his racing brain long enough to get some rest. He was almost asleep when he heard it, a soft sound from the living room. Not quite crying, but close. The muffled noise of someone trying very hard not to be heard breaking down. Caleb lay in the dark, debating. Privacy versus comfort, distance versus compassion. All the calculus of how to help someone without overstepping. In the end, compassion won. He got up, padded quietly to his bedroom door, opened it just enough to see into the living room. Mia was curled on the couch, face buried in the pillow he'd given her, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Hey, he said softly, announcing his presence. You okay? She sat up quickly, wiping her face with rough movements. I'm fine. Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. You didn't. I was still up. He moved into the room, sat in the armchair across from the couch. Not too close, but close enough. Want to talk about it? There's nothing to talk about. I'm just tired and stressed and... Her voice broke. I'm terrified, Caleb. I'm absolutely terrified. I know. No, you don't. You're used to this. You fought these battles before. But I've never done anything like this. I've never stood up to anyone with power. I've spent my whole life trying to be small and quiet and not cause problems. And now I'm in the middle of this legal war and I don't know what I'm doing and I'm going to lose everything. Stop. Caleb leaned forward, caught her eyes. Breathe. You're spiraling. She sucked in a shaky breath, held it, released it slowly. Did it again. The crying slowed, didn't stop completely, but became something more manageable. You're not going to lose everything, Caleb said firmly. You've already survived the worst part. You've documented the abuse, filed the complaints, lawyered up. The hard part's done. The hard part's just starting. Okay, fair. But you're not doing it alone. He grabbed the box of tissues from the side table, handed it to her. You've got a lawyer who's good at this. You've got documentation that proves your case. You've got housing inspector backing. And you've got me, for whatever that's worth. It's worth a lot, she said quietly, wadding up a tissue. More than you probably realize. They sat in the dimness of his living room, lit only by the streetlight filtering through the curtains. Two people who'd been thrown together by circumstance and were trying to figure out what that meant. Can I ask you something? Mia said eventually. Why did you really quit engineering? Not the official story, the real reason. Caleb considered deflecting, considered all the ways he could keep that particular wound private. But she'd been honest with him, broken down in front of him, trusted him with her vulnerability. He owed her the same. Because I couldn't do it anymore, he said simply. After I blew the whistle, after I lost my job and my marriage and my reputation, I tried to get back into it. But every time I looked at blueprints, all I could see were the corners people were cutting, the ways they were prioritizing profit over safety, the lies they told themselves to justify taking risks with other people's lives. He paused, organizing thoughts he rarely examined. I became obsessed with it, started seeing structural failures everywhere. Couldn't trust any building, any contractor, any authority who said something was safe. It was paralyzing. Is that why you knew so much about my apartment? Mia asked. You've been seeing those failures this whole time? In every building I walk into. Caleb smiled without humor. Fun party trick. Really great for my mental health. But you still helped me, even though it probably triggered all of that. Yeah, well, he shrugged. Maybe that's the point. Maybe instead of just seeing the problems, I needed to start fixing them again. Even if it's just one apartment, one tenant, one fight at a time. Mia pulled the blanket tighter around herself, but she was looking at him differently now, like she was seeing past the surface competence to the damage underneath. We're kind of a mess, aren't we? She said. Both of us. Spectacularly. Caleb stood up, stretched. But messes can be fixed. I've seen it happen. In buildings or in people? Both. He moved toward his bedroom, paused at the door. Try to sleep, Mia. Tomorrow's going to be intense, and you need your strength. Caleb? She waited until he turned back. I'm glad you broke down my door. Me too, he said, and meant it more than he probably should. He went to bed thinking about structural failures and the people who tried to fix them, and wondering if maybe, just maybe, he was starting to repair more than just buildings. Outside, the city settled into its nighttime rhythm. Inside, two damaged people tried to rest before the next battle, and somewhere across town, Darren Voss was probably plotting his next move, unaware that he'd picked a fight with the two most stubborn tenants in his entire building. It was going to be an interesting week. Tuesday morning arrived with an envelope taped to Caleb's door. He found it when he went to grab the newspaper at 6 a.m., still half asleep and moving on autopilot. Plain white envelope, no postage, just his name written in aggressive block letters across the front. He knew what it was before he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, official letterhead from Voss Property Management, a notice of lease violation for apartment 7A, his apartment, citing unauthorized occupancy of a non-leaseholder in violation of guest policy terms. Caleb read it twice, his jaw tightening with each word. Then he walked back inside, set it on the kitchen counter where Mia was already up making coffee, and watched her face go pale as she scanned the contents. He's going after you now, she said, her voice small. Because of me. He's grasping at straws. Caleb pulled out his lease, flipped to the guest policy section. Guest stays are permitted for up to 14 consecutive days. You've been here 3 nights. He's got nothing. But he's trying. He's making your life harder because you helped me, which is exactly what we expected. Caleb poured himself coffee with steady hands, refusing to let Darren's intimidation tactics show any effect. This is retaliation, and it's clumsy. Attorney Mitchell is going to love this. He forwarded the notice to Mitchell before Mia could spiral further into guilt, then sat down across from her at the small kitchen table. Outside, the city was waking up. Traffic sounds, distant sirens, the rhythmic clang of garbage trucks making their rounds. Normal morning noises that felt surreal against the backdrop of their escalating war. What else is he going to do, Mia asked, wrapping both hands around her mug like it could anchor her. What's the next move? Could be anything. Noise complaints, claims you violated other lease terms, threats of lawsuit for defamation. Caleb ticked off possibilities with the clinical detachment of someone who'd seen this playbook before. The goal is to make you tired enough to give up, to make the fight cost more than it's worth. Is it working? He looked at her carefully, really looked. She'd slept poorly. That much was obvious from the shadows under her eyes and the tension in her shoulders. But there was something else there too, something harder. Determination maybe, or just stubbornness refined by desperation. You tell me, he said. Mia set down her coffee with deliberate precision. I'm terrified, and exhausted, and I hate every second of this. But I'm not giving up. Not when other people are still living in those conditions. Not when he's counting on me being too scared to fight back. Good. Caleb allowed himself a small smile. Because it's about to get worse before it gets better. His phone rang before she could respond. Attorney Mitchell, calling earlier than Caleb had expected. "We've got a problem," Mitchell said without preamble. Darren Voss filed an emergency motion this morning claiming Ms. Collins damaged her unit with unauthorized modifications and is now attempting to extort him through fraudulent complaints. He's requesting immediate eviction and damages. Caleb put the phone on speaker so Mia could hear. "That's absurd. We've got inspector documentation." "I know, and we'll counter it. But he's also filed a restraining order request claiming you've been harassing him and interfering with his property rights. He's painting you as Ms. Collins's accomplice in some kind of tenant conspiracy." "A conspiracy?" Caleb laughed without humor. "To do what exactly? Force him to maintain his building to code? To extort money through false claims and damage his business reputation?" Mitchell's tone was grim. "It's nonsense, but it's strategic nonsense. He's trying to isolate Ms. Collins, make her look like she's being manipulated by an outside party with ulterior motives." Mia had gone very still, her face bloodless. "Can he do that? Can he actually get a restraining order?" "Unlikely, given the circumstances. But the hearing is scheduled for Thursday morning, which means we need to prepare a defense quickly." Mitchell paused. "Mr. Ward, I need to ask, have you had any physical contact with Mr. Voss? Any interactions that could be construed as threatening?" Caleb thought back to Monday's confrontation in the 8th-floor apartment. The moment he'd stepped between Darren and Mia, his voice dropping into that dangerous calm. "I intervened when he was using his physical presence to intimidate Ms. Collins. I didn't touch him, didn't threaten him, just created distance." "And the housing inspector witnessed this?" "She was standing right there." "Good. We'll get her statement." Mitchell was clearly making notes. "Ms. Collins, I need you to write down every interaction you've had with Mr. Voss since moving in. Dates, times, content of conversations, witnesses, if any. We're building a timeline that shows his pattern of behavior versus yours." "Okay," Mia said, though her voice shook slightly. "How long do I have?" "Ideally by end of day. Can you manage that?" She looked at Caleb, a question in her eyes. He nodded. "We'll get it done," Caleb said. "What else do you need?" They spent the next 20 minutes going over strategy. Mitchell would file counter motions, request Inspector Chen's full report and testimony, subpoena Darren's maintenance records for the entire building. The goal was to shift the narrative from Mia as problem tenant to Darren as negligent landlord facing exposure. After Mitchell hung up, Mia sat very still for a long moment. Then she stood abruptly, walked to the window, stared out at the street below. "I can't believe this is my life," she said quietly. 3 weeks ago, my biggest problem was getting enough students for my aerial yoga class. Now I'm preparing for restraining order hearings and extortion accusations. "Welcome to standing up for yourself." Caleb joined her at the window. "It's not glamorous. It's terrifying." "Yeah." He didn't try to sugarcoat it. "But you're still standing. That counts for something." She turned to look at him, and something in her expression made his chest tight. "What if I can't do this? What if I'm not strong enough?" "You climbed out of an upside-down yoga pose while your ceiling was literally falling apart," Caleb said. "I think you're stronger than you realize." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "That feels like it happened years ago." "It was 4 days ago. Time's weird when you're in crisis mode." The moment hung between them, fragile and charged with things neither of them were ready to name. Then Caleb's phone buzzed with a text from his ex-wife, shattering whatever was building. Change of plans. "Can you take Emma tonight instead?" Something came up. He typed back quickly. "No problem." "What time?" 6 p.m.? "Works for me." He pocketed the phone, turned back to Mia. "Emma's coming home tonight. You okay with that?" "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" "Because explaining to a 6-year-old why you're sleeping on our couch without making her worry is going to require creativity I'm not sure I possess." Caleb ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Mia was learning meant he was trying to solve an impossible problem. "And because this is a lot to have a kid witness." "We'll figure it out." Mia said with more confidence than he felt. Kids are resilient, and it's not like we're doing anything wrong. No. We're just fighting a legal battle against a vindictive landlord while documenting habitability violations and preparing for restraining order hearings. Totally normal Tuesday. That got a real laugh out of her. Small, but genuine. When you put it that way, we sound very productive. They spent the rest of the morning working on Mia's timeline. She pulled up every email, every text, every scrap of documentation from her 8 months as Darren's tenant. Caleb helped her organize it chronologically, highlighting patterns. How Darren's responses got shorter and more dismissive over time. How his tone shifted from professionally distant to subtly threatening. Look at this, Mia said around 11, pointing to an email from 3 months ago. I asked about the weird smell in the hallway. He responded that some odors are normal in older buildings and don't constitute maintenance emergencies. Translation: I'm not fixing it, stop asking. Caleb added it to their evidence file. What happened with the smell? It got worse. Then it went away. I assumed something had died in the walls and decomposed. She paused, a horrible realization crossing her face. Oh no, that was probably mold, wasn't it? The same mold that's in the walls now. Probably. Caleb made a note, which means he was aware of biological contamination and chose to ignore it. That's going to look great in court. By noon, they had a comprehensive timeline that painted a clear picture. Mia had been a model tenant raising legitimate concerns, and Darren had been systematically dismissive while collecting rent on substandard housing. The evidence was damning. Caleb forwarded everything to Mitchell, then stretched his back until it popped. We need a break. You want lunch? I should probably work on rescheduling my classes. I've been putting it off. Mia gestured to her laptop. My students are getting worried about the cancellations. What are you telling them? That I'm dealing with a family emergency, which isn't entirely a lie. She pulled up her email. Though family, in this case, means my building is trying to kill me and my landlord is trying to evict me. Catchy. You should use that as your out-of-office message. She smiled despite everything. I'll workshop it. Caleb made sandwiches while Mia handled her business emails, and they fell into an easy rhythm that was becoming familiar. Coexisting in his small apartment without tripping over each other, sharing space with surprising natural comfort. His phone rang again around 2. Unknown number, but something made him answer. Caleb Ward. Mr. Ward, this is Karen Chen from Unit 3A. We met briefly yesterday during the inspection. He remembered, older woman, quiet, had admitted her bathroom was leaking. Yes, Mrs. Chen, what can I do for you? I received a notice this morning. Mr. Voss is claiming I violated my lease by speaking to the housing inspector without his permission. He's threatening eviction if I participate in any further harassment of his property management. Her voice trembled. I'm 73 years old. I can't afford to move. I don't know what to do. Caleb's jaw clenched. Mrs. Chen, talking to a housing inspector isn't harassment, and it's definitely not a lease violation. Mr. Voss can't evict you for cooperating with a city official. He says I damaged my unit by not reporting the leak sooner. Says the water damage is my fault. When did you first report it? 6 weeks ago. I have the email? Then you're protected. Forward that email to me and to Attorney Mitchell. I'll send you his contact information. He's handling several tenant cases against Mr. Voss. You might qualify for legal aid. There was a long pause, then, softly, Are you sure? I don't want to make trouble. Mrs. Chen, you're not making trouble. Darren Voss is making trouble by retaliating against tenants who report legitimate problems. You have rights. Let us help you exercise them. After he hung up, Mia was looking at him with something like awe. How many people is he going after? Everyone who talked to the inspector, if I had to guess. Caleb pulled up his contact list, started typing, which means we need to warn the others and get them connected with Mitchell before Darren can intimidate them into silence. The next hour became a cascade of phone calls and text messages. 4 other tenants had received similar notices, variations on the same theme of lease violations, retaliation disguised as legitimate landlord action. Caleb documented each one, forwarded the information to Mitchell, and watched their individual fights coalesce into something bigger. A class action lawsuit waiting to happen. This is insane, Mia said, watching him work. He's threatening everyone. He's desperate, which means we're winning. Caleb sent the last email, closed his laptop. Desperate people make mistakes. Or they get dangerous. She wasn't wrong. Caleb had seen contractors get cornered before, watched how they reacted when their negligence was exposed. Some folded, some fought harder, and some... His phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. Back off or you'll regret it. This is your only warning. He stared at it for a moment, then showed it to Mia. Her face went pale. Is that him? She whispered. Unknown number, but the timing's suspicious. Caleb screenshotted it, forwarded it to Mitchell. Add it to the evidence pile. Caleb, this is a threat. An actual threat. Maybe we should... Should what? Give up because he sent a text? He kept his voice calm, even though anger was building in his chest. This is exactly what he wants, to scare us into backing down. What if he does something? What if he... She cut herself off, but Caleb heard what she wasn't saying. What if he hurts you because I got you involved in this? Hey, he caught her hand, squeezed gently. I've dealt with worse than Darren Voss. Contractors who cut corners on 40-story buildings, developers who threatened lawsuits, bosses who tried to bury evidence. This guy's a landlord with an inflated ego. He's not dangerous, he's just loud. You don't know that. I know that threatening someone via text message is the move of someone who's already lost. Caleb released her hand, grabbed his keys. Come on, we're going out. Where? Somewhere that isn't this apartment. You've been cooped up for 3 days and you're starting to spiral. We need air and perspective. Mia looked like she wanted to argue, but something in his expression must have convinced her. She grabbed her jacket, followed him out into the hallway that still smelled faintly of mold and institutional cleaning products. They walked to the small park 3 blocks away, the one with the playground where Caleb sometimes brought Emma on weekends. It was nearly empty on a Tuesday afternoon, just a few teenagers cutting school and a woman with a stroller doing laps on the path. Caleb led Mia to a bench with a view of the trees, sat down, waited for her to join him. Talk to me, he said. What's really going on in your head? She was quiet for a long moment, watching the bare branches move in the wind. I keep thinking about what happens when this is over. Win or lose, I can't stay in that building. Even if Darren fixes everything, even if we win the case, I can't live somewhere that tried to kill me. Can't look at that ceiling every day and not remember hanging upside down thinking I was going to die. That's fair, Caleb said, but I can't afford anywhere else. And my business is built around that neighborhood, those students, that location. If I move somewhere cheaper, I lose my client base. If I lose my client base, I can't pay rent anywhere. She turned to look at him. I'm trapped either way. Not trapped, transitioning. He stretched his legs out, considering his words carefully. You're thinking about this like it's an ending, but maybe it's a recalibration, a chance to rebuild something better. That's very optimistic coming from someone who's living in the same building he's trying to prove is uninhabitable. I said rebuild, not immediately succeed. Caleb smiled wryly. I'm still working on my own recalibration. But that doesn't mean the principle isn't sound. A squirrel ran across the path in front of them, stopped to investigate a discarded wrapper, then scurried up a tree with its prize. They watched it in silence. Can I tell you something? Mia said eventually. Something I haven't told anyone? Of course. I'm not sure I even want to be a yoga instructor anymore. The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them back for months. I mean, I like teaching. I like helping people. But the business side of it, the constant marketing and hustling and trying to stand out in an oversaturated market, I hate it. I only kept pushing because I'd already invested so much time and money that quitting felt like failure. That's called sunk cost fallacy, Caleb said gently. Just because you've invested in something doesn't mean you have to keep investing in it forever. But what else would I do? Yoga is all I know, says the woman who spent last weekend learning how to assist with emergency structural repairs. He nudged her shoulder lightly. You're adaptable. You learn fast. You're braver than you think. Those skills transfer. She leaned back against the bench, tilted her face toward the weak afternoon sun. When did you become a life coach? Right around the time you became a tenant rights activist. We're both trying out new roles. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the park's small ecosystem do its thing. The teenagers eventually wandered off. The woman with the stroller completed another lap and disappeared down a side path. The world kept turning despite their personal crisis, indifferent and strangely comforting in its consistency. I should get back, Mia said finally. Finish that timeline for Mitchell. In a minute. Caleb wasn't ready to return to the pressure cooker of his apartment and the mounting evidence files. Let's just sit here and pretend we're normal people having a normal day. What would normal people talk about? I don't know. Movies, books, embarrassing childhood stories? Mia considered this. Okay, most embarrassing childhood story. You go first. Why me first? Because you suggested it. Fair point. Caleb thought back through years of memories, landed on one that still made him cringe. 5th grade, school talent show. I was convinced I could juggle because I'd successfully juggled 3 tennis balls in my backyard exactly once. Got on stage in front of 300 people and immediately dropped everything. Tried to recover, dropped it again. Ended up just standing there holding 3 tennis balls while everyone stared. Mia laughed, surprised and delighted. What did you do? Took a bow and walked off like it was intentional. Got sympathy applause from the teachers. He shook his head at his younger self's audacity. Your turn. Mine's worse, she warned. 8th grade, first day of school, new outfit, trying to make a good impression. Didn't realize until 4th period that I'd tucked the back of my skirt into my underwear and had been walking around like that all morning. Caleb winced in sympathy. How'd you find out? A kind soul finally told me in the bathroom. I spent the rest of the day in the nurse's office pretending to be sick. She was smiling now, the tension in her shoulders loosening. I wanted to transfer schools. My mom said it would build character. Did it? I'm still mortified 15 years later, so you tell me. They traded stories for another 20 minutes. Small humiliations and victories, the debris of growing up that everyone accumulates. By the time they walked back to the apartment, Mia was laughing more easily, and Caleb felt some of the weight lift from his chest. The feeling lasted until they turned onto their street and saw the police car parked in front of the building. Caleb's heart dropped into his stomach. Stay here. What? No! But he was already moving toward the entrance where 2 officers were talking to someone in the doorway. As he got closer, he recognized Mrs. Chen from 3A, looking small and frightened. What's going on? Caleb asked, inserting himself into the conversation with the practiced authority of someone used to dealing with officials. One of the officers, late 30s, tired eyes, nameplate reading Martinez, turned to him. You live here? 7A. What happened? Received a report of trespassing and property damage. Building owner claims unknown individuals have been accessing units without permission. Caleb's jaw clenched. Let me guess. Darren Voss filed the report. You know him? He's my landlord, and he's in the middle of a dispute with multiple tenants over habitability violations. This is retaliation. Caleb pulled out his phone, started pulling up documentation. We had a building inspector here Monday who found serious code violations. Since then, Mr. Voss has been threatening everyone who cooperated with the inspection. Martinez exchanged a look with his partner, a younger woman whose nameplate read Santos. You got proof of that? I've got emails, text messages, legal filings, and inspector reports. Caleb handed over his phone. The housing authority opened a case yesterday. This is harassment. Martinez scrolled through the evidence with increasing interest. This is a civil matter, not criminal. We can't get involved in landlord-tenant disputes. But you can document a false police report, Caleb said, which is what this is. Nobody's trespassing. The inspector had legal authority to access those units. The tenants live here. Mr. Voss is wasting police resources to intimidate people. He said someone broke into the vacant unit on the 8th floor, Santos said. Left tools and evidence of unauthorized work. That was me, Caleb admitted. But I didn't break in. The inspector opened it with Mr. Voss's keys during an official evaluation. I was providing technical assistance. Can the inspector verify that? Absolutely. I can give you her contact information right now. Martinez handed back Caleb's phone. Look, off the record, this sounds like exactly the kind of landlord-tenant mess we can't fix. But I'll note in my report that multiple tenants dispute the trespassing claim and that there's ongoing legal action. That should be enough to keep Mr. Voss from filing more false reports. Thank you, Caleb said, meaning it, then to Mrs. Chen. You okay? He called the police on me, she said, her voice shaking. I've lived here 12 years and never caused problems, and he called the police. Because he's desperate and cornered. Caleb gently guided her toward the entrance. Come on, let's get you inside. Officers, if you need any additional information, I'm in 7A. They left the police to finish their report and headed into the building. Mia was waiting in the lobby, her face tight with worry. What happened? Darren called the cops claiming we're trespassing and vandalizing the building. Caleb hit the elevator button with more force than necessary. It's fine, they're not filing charges, but it's another level of escalation. This is getting out of control, Mia said as the elevator lurched upward. He's involving the police now. What's next? Caleb didn't have an answer to that, and the not knowing was starting to wear on him. They spent the rest of the afternoon in tense silence, jumping at every sound in the hallway, wondering if each footstep was Darren coming with some new threat. Caleb called Mitchell to report the police incident. Mitchell assured him it actually strengthened their case, showed a pattern of harassment and abuse of legal resources. At 6 p.m., Caleb's ex-wife dropped off Emma. She took one look at Mia sitting on the couch and her expression went carefully neutral. Claire, this is Mia, my neighbor from 7B. She's staying here temporarily while her unit's being repaired. Caleb kept his voice casual, praying Emma wouldn't ask complicated questions. Hi, Mia said, offering a small wave. Claire's gaze moved between them, assessing. How long is temporarily? We're not sure yet. There are some code violations being addressed. I see. Claire crouched down to Emma's level. Be good for Daddy, okay? I'll see you Friday. Okay, Mommy. Emma hugged her, then turned to study Mia with the intense, unfiltered curiosity of a 6-year-old. Are you Daddy's girlfriend? Emma! Caleb felt heat creep up his neck. It's okay, Mia said, smiling at Emma. No, sweetheart. I'm just a friend who needed help. Your dad's been very kind to me. He's good at helping people, Emma said matter-of-factly. He fixed Mrs. Chen's shelf when it broke. That sounds like him. Mia's smile was genuine now, warm. What's your name? Emma Rose Ward. I'm 6 3/4. That's a beautiful name. Emma beamed and Caleb watched something soften in Mia's expression. Kids had that effect. Their uncomplicated acceptance could crack open even the most guarded adults. After Claire left, Emma immediately claimed Mia's attention, showing her drawings and explaining the complex social dynamics of first grade with the gravity of someone discussing international diplomacy. Mia listened with genuine interest, asking questions and laughing at Emma's observations. Caleb made dinner, pasta with marinara, nothing fancy but edible, and watched the two of them interact with something complicated twisting in his chest. This was dangerous territory. Emma getting attached, Mia becoming part of their small ecosystem, the blurring of lines between neighbor and something more. Daddy, can Mia read me a bedtime story? Emma asked as Caleb was clearing dishes. That's up to Mia, sweetheart. I'd love to, Mia said, and Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. At 8:30, Caleb found himself standing outside Emma's room, listening to Mia read Where the Wild Things Are, with surprising theatrical flair, complete with different voices for each character. Emma's delighted giggles echoed through the small apartment. When Mia emerged 20 minutes later, Emma was asleep, and Caleb was trying not to think about how right this felt. She's sweet, Mia said softly, closing the door with care. You're doing a good job with her. Thanks. It's mostly survival and improvisation. That's parenting. She moved past him to the living room, started folding the blanket he'd left on the couch. She asked me if I was sad about my broken apartment. What'd you tell her? That I was sad, but her daddy was helping me feel better. Mia sat down on the couch, looked up at him. Which is true. Caleb sat in his armchair, maintaining the careful distance they'd established. Kids cut through the bullshit. It's refreshing and terrifying. She also asked if we were going to get married. He groaned. I'm sorry, she's in a phase where everyone's getting married. Her friend's parents, her teacher, the mailman. I told her we barely know each other. Mia was smiling now. She said that's what dates are for, getting to know people. First grade relationship advice. That's a new low for me. They sat in comfortable silence, the apartment settling into its nighttime routine. Somewhere above them, footsteps creaked across floorboards. A door slammed. The building breathed and shifted, old bones adjusting to new weight. Caleb? Mia's voice was quiet in the dimness. What happens if we lose? If Darren wins the hearings and the lawsuit and everything? He considered lying, offering false comfort, but she deserved honesty. Then we appeal. We take it higher. We get media involved if we have to. We make enough noise that someone has to listen. He leaned forward, caught her eyes. But we're not going to lose. The evidence is too solid. The law is on our side. He's fighting momentum, and momentum always wins eventually. You sound very sure. I'm not. But I'm committed, which is almost the same thing. Mia pulled her knees to her chest, wrapped her arms around them. I don't know how to thank you for this, for any of this. You've given me a place to stay, helped with the legal stuff, stood up to Darren, dealt with police and inspectors, and you don't have to thank me, Caleb interrupted. This is what people do, or what they should do anyway. Not in my experience. Her voice was very soft. In my experience, people look out for themselves. They help when it's convenient, when it doesn't cost them anything. But you're risking your own housing, your own safety, for someone you barely know. Maybe I needed to, he said. Maybe I needed to remember what it feels like to fight for something that matters instead of just surviving day to day. Or maybe you're just a good person. I'm really not, he smiled without humor. I'm selfish and cynical, and I make terrible decisions, but helping you feels like the first right decision I've made in years, so I'm going with it. The moment stretched between them, loaded with things neither of them could say. Then Mia's phone buzzed, breaking the tension. She checked it, her face going pale. What is it? Caleb asked, already knowing it was bad. Email from Darren. He's issuing a formal eviction notice for both of us. 30 days to vacate, or he'll file for court-ordered removal. Her voice shook as she read. He's also suing for damages to both units and, oh no. What? He's claiming I ran an illegal business out of my apartment without permits, that my yoga classes violated zoning laws and noise ordinances. He's reporting me to the city. Caleb took the phone, read the email with mounting fury. It was a masterpiece of legal intimidation, technically proper in its formatting, absolutely vicious in its content. Darren had escalated from harassment to full scorched earth warfare. Can he do this? Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He can try. Whether he'll succeed is another question. Caleb forwarded the email to Mitchell, then set the phone down. This is retaliation for the police incident. He's throwing everything at us, hoping something sticks. But I didn't have permits. I didn't think I needed them for small online classes. You probably didn't. Most cities don't require home occupation permits for minimal impact activities. But even if you did need one, that doesn't justify eviction without proper notice and process. He pulled up city ordinances on his laptop, started researching. We'll figure this out. When does it stop? Mia's voice cracked. When does he run out of ways to hurt us? Caleb looked at her across his small living room, this woman who'd been hanging upside down 4 days ago in a yoga pose gone wrong, who'd thought her biggest problem was a loose ceiling bracket. Now she was facing eviction and lawsuits and regulatory investigations because she'd dared to ask for basic safety. It wasn't fair. None of it was fair. I don't know when it stops, he admitted, but I know we don't stop fighting first. His phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. Last chance. Drop the complaints or everyone suffers. Caleb stared at it, feeling something cold and hard settle in his chest. He'd been patient. He'd been measured. He'd tried to handle this through proper channels. But there was a line, and Darren had just crossed it. Forward this to Mitchell, he said, handing Mia his phone, and pack a bag, essentials only. What? Why? Because I'm done playing defense. Caleb stood, grabbed his keys and jacket. We're going to the building office right now. We're documenting everything. Every violation, every threat, every piece of evidence we can gather. And then we're going to force Darren's hand before he can make another move. Caleb, it's almost 9 p.m. The office will be locked. I know where he keeps the spare key. Mrs. Chen told me when I fixed her shelf. He paused at the door. You coming? Mia looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood, grabbed her jacket, and followed him into the hallway. This is crazy, she said as they headed for the stairs. Probably, Caleb agreed, but staying passive hasn't been working. Time to take the fight to him. They descended into the building's basement. where the management office sat dark and locked. Caleb found the spare key exactly where Mrs. Chen had described, taped under the stair railing, amateur hour security. Inside, filing cabinets lined one wall, a desk covered in paperwork, a computer that Caleb didn't touch because that crossed into illegal territory. But the files? Those were fair game. They spent the next hour photographing everything they could find. Maintenance requests from dozens of tenants, all marked pending or low priority with dates going back years. Invoices from contractors that showed work orders opened but never completed. Insurance claims that referenced water damage and structural issues Darren had sworn in court filings didn't exist. It was a treasure trove of negligence, meticulously documented by Darren's own hand. "He kept all of it," Mia whispered, disbelief in her voice. "He knew there were problems, and he just filed them away and ignored them." "People like him always keep records," Caleb said, photographing another file. "They think it protects them, proves they were aware and making decisions, but it also proves exactly how long they've been aware and chose to do nothing." By 10:30, they had hundreds of photos, enough evidence to bury Darren in every court in the state. They locked the office carefully behind them, replaced the spare key, and climbed the stairs back to the 7th floor. Neither of them spoke, both processing what they'd found. Back in Caleb's apartment, he immediately sent everything to Mitchell with a detailed explanation. The attorney responded within minutes despite the late hour. "This is gold. Filing emergency motions tomorrow. We've got him." Caleb showed Mia the message. She read it twice, then set down the phone and started crying. Not the desperate tears from earlier in the week, but something different. Relief, maybe. Or just the release of tension that had been building for days. Caleb moved to the couch, sat beside her, let her cry without trying to fix it or stop it. Sometimes people just needed to break down. He understood that. "Sorry," she said eventually, wiping her face. "I don't know why I'm crying now when we're finally winning." "Because you can afford to," he said simply. "When you're in survival mode, you can't break down. You're too busy surviving. But when you get a moment of safety, everything you've been holding back comes out." She leaned against his shoulder, and Caleb let her, even though it complicated things. Even though Emma was asleep down the hall, and this was blurring every line he'd tried to maintain. "Thank you," Mia said again, her voice muffled against his shirt. "For not letting me fall. For any of it." Caleb thought about that first scream through the wall, the moment he'd made a choice without thinking, breaking through her door, catching her before gravity claimed victory. Everything that had followed, the structural failures, the legal battles, the way she'd somehow become essential to his daily existence in less than a week. "You're welcome," he said, and meant it more deeply than words could convey. They sat there in this quiet apartment while the building settled around them, two people who'd found each other in crisis and were learning what it meant to stand together when the world tried to knock them down. Outside, the city continued its restless sleep, and somewhere, Darren Voss was probably realizing that he'd picked a fight with the wrong neighbors. Tomorrow would bring new battles. But tonight, for the first time since this started, Caleb felt like maybe, just maybe, they were going to win. Wednesday morning came with an unexpected silence. No threatening texts, no eviction notices taped to doors, no police showing up with reports of imaginary crimes. Just the normal sounds of a city waking up and a building that had decided to hold itself together for one more day. Caleb didn't trust it. He was up before dawn, checking emails and news alerts, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Mitchell had filed emergency motions overnight using the evidence they'd gathered, requesting an immediate halt to all eviction proceedings, a temporary restraining order against Darren for tenant harassment, and a formal investigation into building code violations across the entire property. The hearing was scheduled for 2 p.m. In less than 8 hours, everything would either break in their favor or collapse completely. Emma was still asleep. Mia was curled on the couch, her breathing deep and even, finally getting the rest her body had been demanding for days. Caleb made coffee as quietly as possible, then stood at his small kitchen window watching the sun climb over the neighboring buildings. His phone buzzed. Mitchell, of course. Darren's attorney requested an emergency conference call at 10 a.m. They want to talk settlement. Caleb read the message 3 times, not quite believing it. Settlement. After all the threats and intimidation and scorched earth tactics, Darren wanted to talk settlement. which meant they had him cornered. He typed back quickly, "What are the terms?" "Don't know yet, but the fact they're asking tells me our evidence hit hard." "Stand by." Caleb forwarded the message to Mia's phone, then started making breakfast. Eggs and toast. Simple but substantial. Emma would be up soon, and he needed to maintain some semblance of normalcy for her sake, even while his own world was in the balance. "Is that food I smell?" Mia's voice came from the living room, groggy and rough with sleep. "Eggs! You want some?" "Please." She appeared in the kitchen doorway, wrapped in the blanket from the couch like a protective shell. Her hair was chaotic, her face puffy from hard sleep. She looked exhausted and fragile and somehow beautiful in the morning light. "Did you see Mitchell's message?" "Yeah, settlement conference at 10. "What does that mean?" She slid into a chair at the small table, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Is it good?" "It means Darren's lawyer saw our evidence and realized they're going to lose in court. So they're trying to negotiate terms before we destroy them publicly." Caleb plated eggs with more precision than required, buying time to organize his thoughts. "Whether it's good depends on what they offer." "What do you think they'll offer?" "Money, probably. Relocation assistance, waived damages, non-disclosure agreements to keep us quiet about the building conditions." He set the plate in front of her, then made his own. "The question is whether we take it or push for something bigger." Mia picked at her eggs without eating. "I don't want his money. I want him held accountable." "Those aren't mutually exclusive." Caleb sat across from her. "You can take a settlement that compensates you for what you've been through and still insist on mandatory repairs and third-party oversight of the building. Make the settlement include real change, not just a payout to make you disappear." "Can we do that? Make demands?" "We have leverage. That's what negotiations are for." He took a bite of eggs, chewed thoughtfully. "But Mia, I need you to be clear about what you want. Money? Justice? Safety for other tenants? All of the above? Because we might not get everything, and you need to know your priorities." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her plate like it held answers. When she finally looked up, her eyes were clear and determined. "I want the building fixed, properly. Not cosmetic patches, not temporary solutions. I want a full structural assessment by an independent engineer and mandatory remediation of every violation. I want regular inspections and a tenant committee with authority to report problems without retaliation." She paused, gathering momentum. "And I want every tenant who's been displaced or threatened to get fair compensation. Not just me. Everyone." Caleb felt something warm expand in his chest. This was what courage looked like. Not fearlessness, but choosing to fight for something bigger than yourself despite the fear. "Then that's what we'll push for," he said simply. They finished breakfast just as Emma wandered out of her room, dragging her stuffed elephant and looking suspicious. "Why are you both up so early?" she asked, climbing into Caleb's lap without invitation. "Adult stuff, sweetheart. Boring paperwork." He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the simple comfort of her presence. "You want pancakes?" "You already made eggs." "I can make both. I'm multi-talented." Emma giggled, and for a moment everything felt normal. Just a dad making breakfast for his kid while his friend, neighbor, whatever Mia was, sat at the table drinking coffee. Ordinary domestic morning, the kind millions of people were having right now across the country. Except Caleb's hands were shaking slightly as he poured pancake batter, and Mia kept checking her phone every 30 seconds. And in 3 hours they were going into a negotiation that would determine the trajectory of multiple lives. But Emma didn't need to know that. Emma needed pancakes and normalcy and the reassurance that her world was stable, even when the adult's world was anything but. By 9:30, Emma was watching cartoons with strict instructions not to disturb them unless it was an emergency. Caleb and Mia set up in his bedroom, the only place with enough privacy for a conference call, and waited for Mitchell to connect them. The attorney's voice came through the phone speaker at exactly 10 a.m., professional and focused. "Good morning. I'm here with Caleb Ward and Mia Collins. Mr. Voss, I assume you and your attorney are on the line?" "We are." A new voice, male, smooth with practiced legal calm. "David Harrison, representing Mr. Voss. Thank you for making time for this discussion." "Let's skip the pleasantries," Mitchell said. "You requested this conference. What are you proposing?" Harrison cleared his throat. "My client is willing to offer Miss Collins a settlement of $20,000, waive all damage claims, and provide 60 days of relocation assistance in exchange for withdrawal of all complaints and a mutual non-disclosure agreement. $20,000. Mia's eyes went wide. That was probably more money than she'd seen in one place in her entire life. Caleb saw the temptation flicker across her face, the easy way out, the escape hatch from this nightmare. Then he saw her jaw set, and he knew she was going to hold the line. "That's insulting," Mitchell said before either of them could respond. Ms. Collins has been living in uninhabitable conditions for months while paying full rent. She's faced retaliation, threats, and false police reports. $20,000 doesn't begin to cover her damages, much less address the systemic issues with the building. My client disputes the characterization of the unit as uninhabitable. Your client's dispute is irrelevant when we have city inspector documentation of emergency code violations. Mitchell's voice hardened. Multiple violations across multiple units, ignored maintenance requests going back years, evidence of deliberate neglect. The Housing Authority is already investigating. This settlement offer suggests you don't understand the gravity of your situation. A pause. Then Darren's voice tight with controlled anger. "What do you want?" "Full structural assessment and remediation of the entire building by a licensed engineer overseen by the Housing Authority. Relocation assistance for all displaced tenants at market rate for the duration of repairs. Compensation for Ms. Collins and any other tenants who can document damages. Formation of a tenant committee with protected reporting rights. And no non-disclosure agreements. What happened in this building is a matter of public record." "That's absurd," Harrison cut in. "You're asking my client to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm asking your client to fulfill his legal obligations as a property owner," Mitchell said calmly. "Obligations he's been ignoring while collecting rent. If he'd rather go to court and have a judge mandate these repairs plus additional penalties, we're happy to proceed." Silence on the other end. Caleb could almost hear the furious whispered conversation happening between Darren and his lawyer. "We need time to discuss this," Harrison said finally. "You have until the hearing at 2 p.m., Mitchell said. "After that, the offer expires and we proceed with full litigation. Ms. Collins has been more than patient." The call ended. Caleb looked at Mia, who was gripping the edge of his bed like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "Did that really just happen?" she whispered. "Did we just turn down $20,000? "You turned down $20,000, Caleb corrected gently. "I just sat here being morally supportive." "Was I crazy? That's so much money." "That's less than what you deserve," he said firmly, "and it wouldn't fix anything. Darren would pay you off, make you sign an NDA, and keep doing exactly what he's been doing to the next tenant. Nothing would change." But what if they don't counter? What if we go to court and lose and I end up with nothing?" "Then we lose," Caleb said. "But at least we'll lose fighting for something that matters." Mia dropped her head into her hands, breathing hard. "I don't know if I can do this. The waiting, the not knowing. Hey." He moved to sit beside her on the bed, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You've already done the hardest part. You stood up. You said no to someone who had all the power. Everything else is just paperwork and lawyers talking. You've already won the part that matters." She turned to look at him, and their faces were suddenly very close. Close enough that Caleb could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, count the freckles across her nose, notice the exact way her breath hitched when she was trying not to cry. "Caleb," she started, but whatever she was going to say was interrupted by Emma's voice from the living room. "Daddy, the TV stopped working." "But..." Caleb pulled back, creating safe distance. "Duty calls." "Yeah." Mia's voice was unsteady. "Go fix the TV. I'll just sit here having a quiet panic attack. That's the spirit." He stood, squeezed her shoulder once. "We've got this. Trust me." He went to deal with the TV, which hadn't actually stopped working. Emma had just accidentally changed the input source. While he was fixing it, his phone rang. Mitchell again. "They countered," the attorney said without preamble. 40,000, 90 days relocation, and they'll agree to hire an engineer for assessment, but they want control over the remediation timeline and scope. "Not good enough," Caleb said, glancing back toward his bedroom where Mia was still processing. "They're trying to maintain control of the repairs, which means they'll do the minimum necessary to pass inspection." Agreed. I'm rejecting it. But I wanted you to know they're moving. They're scared. After Mitchell hung up, Caleb returned to find Mia standing at his bedroom window, arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the street below. They countered, he said. 40,000, better relocation terms, but they want to control the repair process. And we're saying no? Mitchell is. The money doesn't matter if the underlying problems don't get fixed. He joined her at the window. How are you holding up? I keep thinking about what happens after, she said quietly. Win or lose, I can't stay in this building. Every time I look at that ceiling, I'll remember. Every time I walk past Darren in the hallway, She cut herself off, shook her head. I'm going to have to start over somewhere else. New apartment, new neighborhood, probably lose half my students who can't follow me to a different location. Or you rebuild something better, Caleb said. Take the settlement money, whatever we end up with, and use it to create a studio space that's actually yours. Not a corner of a dangerous apartment, but a real professional space. With what for rent? Settlement money doesn't last forever. With a business loan, maybe, or a partnership with an existing gym, or... He paused, an idea forming. Or you could teach me how to renovate a space properly, and I could help you build something from scratch. Put my engineering skills to use for something that actually helps people. Mia turned to look at him, surprise written across her face. You'd do that? I'm already doing it. Might as well make it official. He shrugged like it wasn't a big deal, even though something in his chest was screaming that it was a very big deal. I'm tired of just surviving, Mia. I want to build things again. And maybe building something with someone who actually cares about doing it right would be good for both of us. Before she could respond, his phone rang. Mitchell, third time in 2 hours. They're caving, the attorney said, and Caleb could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Full structural assessment by an independent engineer of your choosing. Mandatory remediation overseen by the Housing Authority. Market rate relocation for all affected tenants. 60,000 for Ms. Collins specifically, with additional compensation available for other tenants pending review. Tenant committee with protected reporting. No NDA. Caleb put the phone on speaker so Mia could hear. What's the catch? They want this settled before the hearing. They don't want the evidence entered into public record, so we need an answer now. Do we take it or go to court? Mia's hand found Caleb's, gripped tight. He could feel her trembling. What do you think? She asked Mitchell. Honestly, this is better than most court outcomes. You'd be guaranteed the repairs and oversight, which is what you wanted. The money's good, and we're not precluding future legal action if they fail to comply with the terms. He paused. But it's your call. I'll fight this in court if that's what you want. Mia looked at Caleb, a question in her eyes. What should I do? I can't make this decision for you, he said gently, but I can tell you that you've already won. You forced a slumlord to agree to fix an entire building and protect future tenants. That's not nothing. But he doesn't go to jail. He doesn't lose his license or his property or say, no, Caleb agreed, but he loses money, control, and reputation. And every tenant in this building gets safer housing because you stood up. That's a win, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. Mia closed her eyes, breathed deep. When she opened them, she looked tired but resolved. Take the settlement, she said to Mitchell, but I want every word of that agreement in writing, with penalties if he doesn't comply. You'll have it by end of day, Mitchell promised. Ms. Collins, you should be proud. This is how change happens, one stubborn tenant at a time. After he hung up, Mia sank onto the bed, all the fight draining out of her at once. It's over. It's actually over. Not quite, Caleb said. We still have to make sure he follows through. But yeah, the worst part's done. She started crying again, those same tears of relief and release. Caleb sat beside her, let her lean against him, felt the weight of the last week finally lifting. They'd won. Not perfectly, not completely, but they'd won. From the living room, Emma called out again, Daddy, I'm hungry. In a minute, sweetheart, Caleb called back, then quieter, to Mia. You good? She laughed through the tears. I don't know what I am. Relieved? Exhausted? Terrified about what comes next? All of the above is acceptable. He handed her a tissue from the box on his nightstand. Take your time. I'll feed the small human, and then we'll figure out next steps. He started to stand, but she caught his hand. "Caleb, wait." She looked up at him, face blotchy and eyes red, but expression clear. "I meant what I said earlier, about starting over. I don't want to do it alone." "You're not alone. You've got students, friends." "I want you," she interrupted. "However that looks, business partner, friend, whatever. I don't want to go back to fighting everything by myself." Caleb's heart was doing something complicated in his chest, making it hard to breathe properly. This was dangerous. This was exactly the kind of entanglement he'd been avoiding since his divorce. But looking at Mia, fierce and fragile and still holding his hand like it was the only solid thing in her world, he couldn't find it in himself to care about the danger. "Okay," he said simply. "We'll figure it out together." Emma's voice drifted from the living room, more insistent now. "Daddy!" "Coming!" He squeezed Mia's hand once more, then went to make lunch for his daughter, while his neighbor, friend, partner, whatever she was becoming, pulled herself together in his bedroom. The afternoon passed in a strange limbo. The settlement was real, but it didn't feel real. Mitchell sent over the draft agreement, and they spent 2 hours reviewing every clause, every contingency, every protection they'd built in. It was ironclad, or as close as legal documents could get. Darren had until Friday to sign. Then the work could begin, real structural assessment, real repairs, real accountability. Around 4 p.m., Caleb's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He almost deleted it, assuming it was another threat. But something made him open it. "This isn't over. You've cost me money and reputation. Watch your back." He showed it to Mia, watched her face go pale. "He's not going to let this go," she said. "Even with the settlement, he's going to do nothing," Caleb said firmly. "Because if he violates the terms or retaliates in any way, Mitchell will bury him in contempt charges. This is just posturing, empty threats from someone who's already lost." "You don't know that. I know men like Darren, all bark, no actual bite. He's going to sign the settlement, fix the building to minimum spec, and then sell it to someone else and wash his hands of the whole mess." Caleb forwarded the text to Mitchell for documentation. "He's done." But that night, as Caleb lay in bed trying to sleep, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in his gut. Darren had proven himself vindictive and unpredictable. What was to stop him from lashing out one more time? He was still awake at 2 a.m. when he heard it. A sound from above. Not the normal settling noises or neighbor footsteps. Something heavier, more deliberate. Caleb sat up, listening intently. There it was again. A creak. A scrape. Like someone moving furniture. But the unit above him was supposed to be vacant. He got out of bed quietly, pulled on jeans and a shirt, checked that Emma was still sleeping. Mia was curled on the couch, dead to the world. He didn't wake either of them. Instead, he grabbed his phone and a flashlight and headed upstairs. The 8th floor hallway was dark, except for the emergency exit signs. Caleb moved carefully toward 8A, the unit directly above his, and put his ear to the door. Silence now. But he could see light under the door, faint and flickering, like a flashlight or candle. Someone was inside. Caleb's first instinct was to call the police. His second instinct was to call Mitchell. His third instinct, the one he actually followed, was to carefully test the door handle. Unlocked. He pushed it open slowly, his heart hammering. The apartment beyond was dark except for that flickering light source coming from deeper inside. And there was a smell. Acrid. Chemical. Wrong. "Hello?" Caleb called out, announcing his presence. "Who's in here?" The light went out immediately, then footsteps running toward the back of the unit, a window scraping open, the sound of someone climbing out onto the fire escape. Caleb moved quickly through the dark apartment, following the sounds. When he reached the bedroom, the window was wide open, cold air streaming in. He looked out just in time to see a figure in dark clothes descending the fire escape ladder, moving fast. And on the floor beneath the window, Caleb saw what they'd left behind. Gasoline containers. 3 of them, opened, the chemical smell overwhelming now. Rags stuffed into the tops, ready to be lit. Someone had been about to set the building on fire. Caleb's blood went cold. He pulled out his phone, dialed 911 with shaking hands. "I need to report an attempted arson," he said when the dispatcher answered. "Someone just tried to firebomb my building." The next 2 hours were chaos. Police and fire department arrived within minutes, evacuating the entire building as a precaution. Tenants stumbled out in pajamas and confusion, gathering on the street while firefighters swept the structure for additional incendiary devices. Caleb stood on the sidewalk with Emma wrapped in a blanket and Mia pressed against his side, watching officials move in and out of the building he'd been trying to save. "This was Darren," Mia said, her voice hollow. "He tried to burn it down. He tried to kill us." "We don't know that," Caleb said, even though every instinct screamed the same conclusion. The fire chief approached them around 4 a.m., his expression grim. "Mr. Ward, you're the one who called it in?" "Yes, I heard someone moving around upstairs, went to check, found the accelerants." "You see who it was?" "No, they ran when I opened the door, went down the fire escape. We're reviewing security footage from neighboring buildings. We'll find them." The chief paused. "You probably saved a lot of lives tonight. That much gasoline in an old building like this? The whole structure would have gone up in minutes." Caleb felt Mia shudder against him. He tightened his arm around her shoulders. "Can we go back inside?" someone called from the crowd of tenants. "Not yet. We need to finish the sweep and document the scene." The chief's radio squawked and he moved away to respond. They waited in the cold pre-dawn while investigators did their work. Mrs. Chen brought them coffee from the 24-hour bodega on the corner. Other tenants clustered together, speculating about who would do this and why. Caleb kept his theories to himself. But when he saw Mitchell arrive, summoned by Caleb's text, he pulled the attorney aside. "This was retaliation," Caleb said quietly. "Darren found out about the settlement and decided if he had to pay for repairs, he'd rather collect insurance money on a total loss." "That's a serious accusation," Mitchell said. "Can you prove it?" "Not yet, but the timing's suspicious. Settlement gets finalized and 12 hours later someone tries to burn down the building. That's not coincidence. We'll let the police investigate. But if it does trace back to Voss," Mitchell's expression hardened. "That's arson, attempted murder, insurance fraud. He'd go to prison." "Good," Caleb said flatly. "He should." By the time the sun came up, they were finally allowed back inside. The building smelled like gasoline and fear, but it was structurally sound. The fire had been prevented before it started. Caleb got Emma settled back in bed. She'd slept through most of the drama, bless her 6-year-old resilience. Then he found Mia sitting on his couch, staring at nothing. "You okay?" he asked, sitting beside her. "He tried to kill us." Her voice was eerily calm. "All of us. The whole building. Because we dared to hold him accountable." "We don't know it was him." "Yes, we do." She turned to look at Caleb, and her eyes were hard. "We know. And if the police don't prove it, it doesn't matter because I'm done being scared of him." "Mia, I'm serious. I've spent this entire week terrified of losing my home, my business, everything I've built, but he just tried to burn it all down anyway. So what's left to be afraid of?" She stood up, pacing his small living room with sudden energy. "He took his best shot, and he missed. Now it's our turn." Caleb watched her pace, recognizing something he'd seen in himself years ago. That moment when fear transformed into fury, when survival mode shifted into fight mode. "What do you want to do?" he asked carefully. "I want to make sure everyone knows what he did. I want every tenant in this building to understand that their landlord tried to commit murder to avoid paying for repairs." She stopped pacing, faced him. "Can we do that? Can we make sure this doesn't just disappear?" "We can try." Caleb was already thinking through options. Media coverage, tenant organizing, public pressure. Even if the police can't prove it was Darren, we can make enough noise that his reputation is destroyed. "Will that be enough?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But it's something. It's fighting back instead of just surviving." Mia came to sit beside him again, close enough that their knees touched. "I'm tired of surviving." "Yeah," Caleb said, understanding completely. "Me too." They sat in the growing morning light, two people who'd been pushed to their absolute limit and had somehow found the strength to push back. The building around them creaked and settled, damaged but standing, full of people who didn't know how close they'd come to disaster. Outside, Caleb could hear the morning city sounds resuming, traffic, voices, the rhythmic beeping of a truck backing up, life continuing despite the night's crisis. His phone buzzed. Mitchell, with news. Police found security footage. Man matching Darren's build entering the building at 1:47 a.m., exiting at 2:03 a.m. via fire escape. They're bringing him in for questioning. Caleb showed the message to Mia, watched relief and vindication war across her face. They got him, she whispered. They actually got him. They got someone on camera, Caleb corrected, not wanting to get her hopes up too high. Whether they can prove it was Darren and connect him to the arson attempt is another question. But it's something. It's evidence. It's a start. The rest of Wednesday passed in a blur of police statements and insurance calls and tenants demanding answers. By late afternoon, word had spread through the building. Someone had tried to burn it down, and that someone was possibly their landlord. The tenant meeting that spontaneously organized in the lobby at 6 p.m. was angry and loud and absolutely beautiful to witness. 15 tenants, all demanding answers, all refusing to be intimidated anymore. Mrs. Chen stood up and told her story. 6 weeks of ignored leak, threats of eviction for talking to inspectors. Others followed, sharing their own experiences with Darren's negligence and retaliation. By the end of the meeting, they'd formed an official tenant association with Mrs. Chen as president. They'd voted unanimously to demand Darren's immediate removal as property manager pending the arson investigation. And they'd agreed to collectively withhold rent until an independent management company took over. Caleb watched it happen with something like pride. This was what happened when people stopped being afraid, when they realized their collective power was stronger than any individual landlord's intimidation tactics. You started this, Mia said quietly, standing beside him at the edge of the crowd. No, Caleb said. You started this when you wouldn't accept that a broken ceiling was just your problem to endure. I just helped you amplify it. We helped each other. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. That's what partners do. Partners. The word settled into Caleb's chest, warm and right and terrifying all at once. Before he could respond, his phone rang. Not Mitchell this time, a number he didn't recognize, but local. Caleb Ward. Mr. Ward, this is Detective Sarah Morrison with the Arson Investigation Unit. I need to ask you some questions about what you witnessed last night. They spent 30 minutes going over every detail, what he'd heard, what he'd seen, the timeline of events. Morrison was thorough and professional, taking notes without revealing anything about their investigation. One more question, she said at the end. Do you have any reason to believe Darren Voss would want to destroy this property? Caleb thought about lying, about playing it safe, and letting the investigation proceed without his speculation. Then he thought about gasoline-soaked rags, and how close they'd all come to dying in their sleep. Yes, he said. We just finalized a settlement requiring him to spend hundreds of thousands on structural repairs. If the building burned down instead, he'd collect insurance money and avoid the expense. That's motive. I see. Morrison made another note. Thank you for your time, Mr. Ward. We'll be in touch if we need anything else. After she hung up, Mia looked at him questioningly. They're building a case, Caleb said. Whether they have enough to charge him is another question. What if they don't? What if he gets away with it? Then we make sure everyone knows anyway, Caleb said firmly. Police case or not, the court of public opinion can be just as effective. That night, Emma asked the question Caleb had been dreading. Daddy, why did the police come? Is someone bad trying to hurt us? He sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. Someone made a very bad choice that could have hurt people, but they didn't succeed, and now the police are making sure it won't happen again. Was it the mean landlord? Emma asked with the blunt perceptiveness of children everywhere. We don't know for sure, sweetheart, but you're safe. I promise. Is Mia safe too? Yes, Mia's safe. Good. Emma hugged her elephant tighter. I like her. She's nice, and she makes you smile more. Caleb felt something catch in his throat. Does she? Yeah. You're different when she's around. Less sad. He hadn't realized he'd been sad. Or maybe he had, but he'd gotten so used to it that he'd stopped noticing. But Emma noticed. Kids always noticed. Get some sleep, sweetheart, he said, kissing her forehead. Everything's going to be okay. He found Mia in the living room, working on her laptop with the focused intensity of someone trying to avoid thinking about recent trauma. Emma says you make me less sad, he said without preamble. Mia looked up, surprised. What? Apparently I smile more when you're around. He sat in his armchair, the familiar distance between them. She's very observant. She's wonderful, Mia said softly. You're doing an amazing job with her. Most days I'm just hoping I don't screw her up too badly. That's parenting. Mia closed her laptop, gave him her full attention. Caleb, can I ask you something? Sure. Oh, what happens when this is over? When the settlement's finalized and the building's repaired and we're not in crisis mode anymore? She was nervous, asking, he could tell. Do we just go back to being neighbors who nod at each other in the hallway? Is that what you want? No. She said it immediately, no hesitation. I don't want to go back to being alone. I don't want to lose this. Whatever this is. Caleb's heart was doing that complicated thing again, making his chest tight. This is me helping you because you needed help. This is you being the first person in years who treated me like I mattered, Mia corrected, who saw me struggling and decided my struggle was worth fighting for. That's not nothing, Caleb. No, he agreed quietly. It's not nothing. So what is it? He looked at her across his small living room, this woman who'd been a stranger 6 days ago and was now somehow essential to his daily existence, who made him remember what it felt like to care about something beyond just surviving, who'd walked into his life upside down and had been turning his world right side up ever since. I don't know, he admitted, but I know I don't want to lose it either. Mia smiled, tentative but real. Then we'll figure it out, together. Together, Caleb echoed, and felt something settle into place. They talked until midnight, about futures and possibilities, about what came next for both of them. Mia admitted she'd been contacted by a local gym about teaching classes in their new yoga studio. Caleb confessed he'd been thinking about starting his own consulting firm for building safety assessments. We could partner up, Mia said, half joking. Yoga and structural engineering, very complementary skill sets. The yoga engineer, Caleb said, playing along, helping you find balance in your buildings and your body. They laughed, and it felt good. Normal. Like maybe, just maybe, there was life beyond crisis, beyond just surviving. Around 1 a.m., Caleb's phone lit up with an alert. News notification. Local landlord arrested in arson investigation. He opened the article with shaking hands. There it was, Darren's mugshot, looking older and meaner than in person. Charges: attempted arson, reckless endangerment, insurance fraud conspiracy. The security footage had been enough. Combined with the physical evidence and his clear motive, the DA had moved fast. Caleb showed it to Mia wordlessly. She read it twice, then started crying for the 4th time that week. But these tears were different, pure relief, validation, the weight of justice finally arriving. It's over, she said through the tears. It's really, actually over. Yeah, Caleb said, pulling her into a hug without thinking. It's over. She clung to him, and he held her, and somewhere in that embrace something shifted between them, crossed a line from allies to something deeper, something that scared him and excited him in equal measure. Thank you, Mia whispered against his shoulder, for everything, for not letting me fall. You didn't let me fall either, Caleb said, realizing it was true. We held each other up. They stayed like that for a long time, two people who'd survived a week from hell and had somehow found each other in the wreckage. The building settled around them, damaged but standing, full of stories and scars and people who'd fought to keep their homes. Outside, the city slept. Inside, Caleb and Mia held on to each other and believed, maybe for the first time in years, that tomorrow might actually be better than today. 3 months later, Caleb stood in the empty studio space on Fletcher Street and tried to imagine it filled with light and possibility instead of dust and abandoned dreams. The previous tenant had been a print shop that went under during the pandemic. The space still smelled faintly of ink and paper, but the bones were good. High ceilings with exposed beams, large windows facing east, enough square footage for what they had in mind. And most importantly, the structure was sound. Caleb had spent 2 hours the previous week doing a thorough assessment, and aside from some cosmetic issues and outdated electrical, the building was solid. What do you think? Mia appeared beside him, holding 2 cups of coffee from the place across the street. She'd cut her hair shorter, just above her shoulders, and there was a lightness to her now that hadn't been there before. Like she'd finally put down weight she'd been carrying too long. I think it's perfect, Caleb said, accepting the coffee. Electrical needs upgrading. We'll want to add some soundproofing between this space and the upstairs apartments, and those windows should be replaced with energy-efficient models. But structurally, it's everything we need. Can we afford it? The question was practical, not fearful. Mia had learned to ask hard questions without spiraling into panic. With the settlement money as down payment and a small business loan for renovations? Yeah, we can afford it. He pulled out his phone, showed her the spreadsheet he'd been working on for weeks. Tight the first year, but sustainable if your student projections are accurate. They're conservative, actually. Mia walked to the center of the space, turned in a slow circle. I've got 12 students who've already committed to following me here, and the gym contract gives us guaranteed income for 6 months while we build the private client base. We'll make it work. Caleb watched her claim the space with her presence, and something warm settled in his chest. This was happening. They were actually doing this, building something real together, something that belonged to both of them. His phone buzzed. Mitchell, with an update he'd been waiting for. Final settlement disbursement approved. Funds should hit your account by end of week. Also, Voss pled guilty. Sentencing is next month, but prosecution is pushing for max penalty given the attempted arson. Caleb showed the message to Mia. She read it, nodded once, and handed back the phone without comment. They'd stopped celebrating Darren's downfall weeks ago. He was no longer the villain in their story, just a cautionary tale about what happened when greed and negligence went unchecked. Emma's going to love this place, Mia said, changing the subject with the ease of someone who'd learned to live forward instead of looking back. All this space to run around while we're working. She'll probably try to convince us to install a swing from those beams, Caleb said, smiling at the thought. His daughter had taken to Mia with the fierce attachment of a kid who recognized good people instinctively. She'd asked 3 times if Mia was going to stay forever, and each time Caleb had fumbled through non-answers while his heart did complicated gymnastics. Would that be so terrible? Mia was looking at him now with an expression he'd learned to recognize over the past 3 months. The one that said, "We both know where this is going. Why are we still pretending otherwise?" A swing? Probably a liability issue. Caleb. She moved closer, and suddenly the empty studio felt very small. I'm not talking about the swing. He knew. Of course he knew. They'd been dancing around it since that night in his apartment when she'd asked what happened when the crisis was over, and he'd admitted he didn't want to lose what they'd found. Since then, they'd spent nearly every day together, planning the studio, negotiating the lease, having dinner with Emma, falling into a routine that felt more like a relationship than either of them had acknowledged out loud. No, he said quietly. It wouldn't be terrible. It would be... He paused, searching for the right word. Scary. But good scary. The best kind of scary, Mia agreed. She was close enough now that he could smell her shampoo, something citrus and clean. The kind where you're terrified, but you jump anyway because the alternative is spending the rest of your life wondering what if. Is that what we're doing? Jumping? I think we already jumped, she said. We just haven't admitted we're midair yet. Caleb laughed, surprised and caught, and somehow relieved. That's a terrible metaphor for someone who spent a week dealing with literal structural failures. Then catch me before we hit the ground. Her voice was light, teasing, but her eyes were serious. That's what you do, right? You catch people. Only when they're hanging upside down in yoga poses. Lucky for you, I'm very flexible. He kissed her before he could overthink it, before his brain could catalog all the reasons this was complicated and risky and potentially disastrous. Just leaned in and closed the distance and discovered that Mia Collins tasted like coffee and possibilities. She made a small surprised sound, then kissed him back with an enthusiasm that suggested she'd been waiting for him to make this move for a while. Her hands found his shoulders. His found her waist. And for a moment, the empty studio with its dusty floors and uncertain future was the most perfect place in the world. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder, Mia was smiling. So, we're doing this? Apparently, Caleb said, his heart racing like he'd just run a marathon. Though for the record, that was possibly the worst business decision either of us has ever made. Worse than me installing aerial silks into rotting drywall? Point taken. He pulled her closer, rested his forehead against hers. We're going to have to tell Emma. Emma already knows, Mia said with certainty. That kid is terrifyingly perceptive. She gets it from her mother. The perception thing, I mean, not the terrifying part. Your ex-wife is going to hate this. My ex-wife has been dating her yoga instructor for 6 months, Caleb said. She has no grounds for complaints. And anyway, this isn't about her. This is about us figuring out what we want. And what do you want? Mia asked, her voice soft. Caleb thought about the question seriously. A year ago, he would have said he wanted stability, safety, a life without drama or risk. But that was before a scream through the wall had reminded him what it felt like to act instead of endure. Before he'd met a woman who was stronger than she knew and braver than she believed. Before he'd remembered that the best things in life required jumping without knowing if you'd land safely. I want to build this studio with you, he said. I want to help you teach people how to find balance. I want to wake up every morning and choose to show up for something that matters. And I want... He paused, gathering courage. I want to see where this goes. With you. If you're willing to risk it. I've been willing since you broke down my door, Mia said. I was just waiting for you to catch up. They sealed it with another kiss, slower this time, taking their time to memorize the moment. Outside, the city moved through its afternoon rhythm, traffic and voices, and the endless pulse of life continuing. Inside, two people who'd found each other in crisis were choosing to build something in the calm. 6 weeks later, the studio opened. They'd worked around the clock to make it happen, Caleb handling the renovations with the precision of someone who'd spent 15 years in construction, Mia managing the business side and marketing with surprising skill. Emma had helped paint the walls, choosing a warm cream color that made the space feel bigger and brighter. The grand opening was small but meaningful. 15 students, mostly people who'd followed Mia from her old classes, plus a few curious neighbors drawn by the professional signage and the promise of introductory rates. Mrs. Chen came, along with several other tenants from the old building who'd become something like family during the fight against Darren. Caleb stood in the back and watched Mia teach her first official class in their space, and felt pride swell in his chest. She was magnificent, confident and encouraging, guiding people through poses with patience and genuine care. This was who she was supposed to be, not someone cowering in a damaged apartment hoping her landlord wouldn't notice her existence. After class, while students filtered out, Emma tugged on Caleb's sleeve. "Daddy, can I ask Mia something?" "Sure, sweetheart. What?" "If she's going to live with us now, or if we're going to live with her." Emma said it with the casual directness of a 7-year-old who'd just stated an obvious fact. Caleb's brain stuttered. "What makes you think? Because she has a toothbrush at our house, and you have one at hers, and you smile at each other like Mommy and David smile at each other," Emma explained with exaggerated patience. "So I was just wondering where we're all going to live. Because I like both apartments, but yours is closer to my school." Mia had overheard, was trying not to laugh. "That's a very logical question, Emma." "We haven't really discussed," Caleb started. "We should probably discuss it, though," Mia interjected, "since apparently we're not being as subtle as we thought." Emma looked between them hopefully. "So is that a yes?" "It's a let us talk about it and we'll let you know," Caleb said, shooting Mia a look that promised they would definitely be discussing this later. That night, after Emma was asleep in her room and the studio was locked up for the night, Caleb and Mia sat in his apartment, the same apartment where she'd spent that first terrifying week on his couch, where they'd planned their legal strategy and built their case and slowly fallen into each other's orbits. "She's not wrong," Mia said, curled up beside him on the couch that had been her bed. "We basically live together already. I'm here 5 nights a week." "I know." Caleb had been thinking about it for weeks, running scenarios and calculations. But moving in together is a big step, especially with Emma involved. I need to make sure we're doing it for the right reasons. "What are the right reasons?" "Because we want to build a life together, not just because it's convenient or cost-effective, or because my daughter asked nicely." He turned to face her. "Because we're committed to making this work, whatever this is." "This is a relationship," Mia said firmly. "We can call it that. We're allowed." "A relationship," Caleb repeated, testing the words. "With my business partner, who also happens to be my girlfriend, who my daughter loves, and who somehow makes everything in my life better just by existing in it." "That's a very long job description." "You're overqualified." Mia laughed, but then her expression turned serious. "I want this, Caleb, not just the business or the convenient arrangement. I want mornings with you and Emma, I want to build something real that isn't born out of crisis and desperation. I want us to choose each other every day, not because we have to, but because we want to. Then let's do it, he said, surprising himself with the certainty. Let's find a place that's ours, not my apartment or yours. Somewhere we choose together where we can build the life we both want. With enough space for Emma to run around, and maybe a spare room for a home office, or a second kid eventually, if we... He stopped, realizing what he'd just implied. Mia's eyes went wide. Are we talking about kids already? We've only been officially dating for 6 weeks. We've been unofficially dating since you cried on my couch about being terrified and I told you I'd carry it, Caleb corrected. That was 3 months ago. We're just catching up to what's been happening all along. So you want more kids? She was searching his face, trying to read him. I want a future with you, he said carefully. Whatever that looks like. Kids? No kids? A house full of rescue dogs? I'm flexible. I just want you in it. Mia kissed him then, soft and certain. Then let's build it. All of it. The studio, the life, the future. Let's choose the scary, beautiful thing instead of playing it safe. 4 months after that, they found the house. It was small but solid, a 2-bedroom bungalow in a neighborhood with good schools and a park 3 blocks away. The inspection revealed minor issues, aging roof, outdated kitchen, a bathroom that needed work, but nothing Caleb couldn't handle. And the backyard had a tree perfect for the swing Emma had been requesting since the day they'd looked at the studio space. They moved in on a Saturday in early spring, with help from Mrs. Chen and her grandson, and several of Mia's yoga students who apparently were very good at lifting heavy furniture. By sunset, the house looked lived in and loved, full of mismatched furniture and Emma's artwork, and the combined debris of 3 lives merging into one. That night, after Emma was asleep in her new room, freshly painted purple at her insistence, Caleb and Mia sat on their back porch and watched the sky fade from blue to black. We did it, Mia said, leaning against his shoulder. We actually built something good out of all that mess. You sound surprised. I am, a little. 6 months ago, I was hanging upside down thinking I was going to die. Now I have a business and a home, and she gestured between them. This, whatever this is. This is family, Caleb said, realizing it was true. Not the one you're born into, but the one you choose, the one you fight for. I like that. Mia laced her fingers through his. I like us. Yeah, Caleb said, feeling contentment settle into his bones. Me too. Later that week, Caleb stopped by the old building on his way home from a consultation job. It looked different now, scaffolding covering one side, construction crews working methodically through the repairs that the settlement had mandated. The new property management company had been thorough, hiring reputable contractors and scheduling regular inspections. Mrs. Chen saw him from her window and waved him up. Her apartment looked transformed, fresh paint, new fixtures, the ceiling properly repaired and waterproofed. They did good work, she said, offering him tea. Almost makes me forget how bad it was. Almost, Caleb agreed, accepting the cup. But not quite. No, not quite. She settled into her chair with a sigh. I heard about your new place and the studio. You and Mia are making quite the life together. We're trying. Caleb sipped the tea, felt warmth spread through his chest. It's scary and messy and probably ill-advised, but it feels right. The best things usually are, Mrs. Chen said wisely. Scary and messy and right all at once. That's how you know it matters. When Caleb got home that evening, he found Emma and Mia in the backyard. Mia was attempting to teach her a simple yoga pose while Emma dissolved into giggles every time she lost her balance. You have to find your center, Mia was saying, demonstrating. Feel where your body's stable and build from there. Like Daddy does with buildings? Emma asked. Exactly like that. Mia caught Caleb's eye over Emma's head, smiled. Find the strong foundation and build up carefully. What if you fall? Emma asked. Then someone catches you, Mia said simply. That's what people who love you do. They catch you when you fall. Emma seemed to consider this seriously. Then she tried the pose again, wobbled, and this time Mia's hands were there to steady her. Not catching her from a fall, just providing support while she found her own balance. Caleb watched them together in the fading light and felt something complete itself in his chest. This was what he'd been missing in all those years of just surviving, not the absence of crisis, but the presence of connection. People to fight for, people to build with, people who caught you when you wobbled and steadied you until you could stand on your own. That night, after Emma was asleep and he and Mia were curled together in their bed in their house, in the life they'd chosen, she asked him the question, "Do you ever regret it, breaking down my door that night?" Caleb thought about it seriously. About everything that had followed, the legal battles, the threats, the night someone had tried to burn down the building with all of them inside, the fear and exhaustion and moments when it had seemed easier to just walk away. "No," he said finally. "Best decision I ever made." Even though it was complicated and dangerous and probably traumatized your daughter? Emma's fine, better than fine. She's got a mother and a father who both love her, plus you who she's decided is her favorite person after her stuffed elephant. He pulled Mia closer. And yeah, it was complicated and dangerous, but it was also real. The first real thing I'd done in years that wasn't just going through the motions. "You saved my life that night," Mia said quietly, literally and figuratively. "You saved mine too," Caleb said. "You just didn't realize it." They lay in the darkness, listening to the house settle around them, their house, full of their choices and their dreams and their beautiful, scary future. "Caleb?" Mia's voice was soft. "If I try something new tomorrow and I wobble, I'll catch you," he promised. "Always. Even if I fall, especially if you fall." He kissed her forehead. "That's what people who love each other do." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You love me?" "Yeah," Caleb said, realizing he'd never actually said it out loud until now. "I really do." "Good," Mia said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "Because I love you too. Have for a while now. I was just waiting for you to catch up." "I'm here now," he said. "Not going anywhere. Promise?" "Promise." Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm. Inside, two people who'd found each other through crisis were building something that would last long after the danger had passed. A studio, a home, a family, a life worth fighting for. And somewhere in the rafters of their house, a small girl dreamed of swings and yoga poses, and the two adults who'd taught her that when you fall, the people who love you will always be there to catch you. It wasn't the ending either of them had expected when that scream had shattered through an apartment wall 6 months ago. But it was the ending they'd earned, messy and imperfect and absolutely worth every terrifying moment it had taken to get there. Because in the end, the best lives weren't the ones without crisis. They were the ones where you found someone worth fighting through the crisis with. Someone who'd hold you steady when you wobbled, catch you when you fell, and stand beside you while you learned to balance again. And Caleb Ward and Mia Collins had found exactly that in each other, not because it was easy or convenient or safe, but because when gravity tried to pull them down, they'd both decided to reach out and hold on instead. That was the real story. Not the building that nearly collapsed, or the landlord who went to prison, or the legal battles won and lost. But two people learning that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone see you struggling and trust them to help carry the weight. They'd both been falling when they met, but they'd caught each other. And now they were building something strong enough to last.